Thank you, Catherine. That's a good way to word it. She said they can afford it if the house is worth blank or higher. Don't forget, guys, I need you on video. Need you on video for class. Okay, let's take a look. So first step in these seller net problems, first of all, we can't really do much with this 7% at the moment, right? It's not in dollars. Everything else is in dollars. So we need to work with the dollars first. We'll take that 230, add the 12 and the 5, add the 150, and that's a total, correct me if I'm wrong, of $397,000. That's what they need to end up with after they pay your commission. And so the next step is, how much is the seller's portion? 100% is the sale price that it's going to sell for. Your commission is 7%, so your part is that, you and your firm. Their part is 93%. So then we rewrite this thing. $397,000 is 93% of what? Replace that with some math symbols and do the math. 397 divided by 93% means it needs to sell for $426,882. Now from that, they can pay your 7%, and then they'll have enough left to pay these 3 expenses and end up with $230 in their pocket. Good. The next, okay, no problem. So step 1, again, the money, the dollars we've got are the seller net, the amount they need to end up with of $230,000. The closing costs that we know that they're going to have to pay, the repairs that they're going to need to pay for, and these could be any expenses that they give you on the test question. And then they also have to pay off their final loan. And all 4 of these items add up to $397,000. So they need that $397,000 in after they've sold the property and paid you. They need to end up with $397,000 so they can handle these 4 things, right? Well, if you're taking the wrong next step of calculating 7% of this number, that's going to short you a couple $1,000s in commission. You don't want to do that. You agreed to pay to do this for commission based on the full sale price. This is not the full sale price. This is the net after they pay you. So we got to work backwards. And so all you have to do is figure out the seller's portion of the total. The seller's portion of the total sale price is what's left after they pay you your 7%. Or if you charge 6%, whatever that might be. In this case, you're charging them 7%. 100% is the total sale price. 7% is your commission. And then 93% is the seller's portion that they're left with after they sell it. Now, from this 93%, they got to pay all that stuff we just did. They got to pay this $400,000 worth of stuff out of that 93% of sale price. So we need to turn this $397,000 into, work backwards and turn it into the price it needs to sell for to pay you and all of those items. And the way we do that is to take that dollar amount and divide it by the seller's percentage. Understanding the why is probably not as important as just knowing, okay, here are the 3 steps to determining seller net. I mean, it's nice if you know the why as well, but lead with the how, right? Lead with the how. Just try to work on understanding how it works. So this would be step one. Add up all the dollars that they're going to need to spend, and then also that they want to end up with when the sale is all finished and they've paid all their obligations. Step two is figure out what portion of the sale price is going to go to the seller. And then step three is the little magic formula you write for yourself. $397,000 is the seller's portion, the 93% of what number? And we're looking for this number, this sales price. In other words, here's how we get the sale price that it needs to sell for. And so when we plug 397 into the calculator, divide it by 93%, it needs to sell for $426,882. Let's check that. Let's check that math and go backwards. We know it works, but let's just do it. Let me make a little space. Make a little room over here. And so if it were to sell for 426, hopefully it will. Oh my goodness, it's taking a long time. I'm going to do it this way. It did not work. Okay, we sell it for the $426,882. And we take 7% off of that because that's what they got to pay us. $426,882. Times 7% is $29,881. I'm not saying you need to learn how to do what I'm talking about now. I'm just showing you how the numbers work. We're going backwards and saying if we sell it for $426,882 and subtract this 29, we are left with $397,000, just about exactly. Oh, good. Look at that. That's a number we recognize. And if we have this 397, or if they do after they've paid us, then we can start subtracting out the items that they are obligated to pay. We pay off the loan first, $150,000. Now we're left with this much. We pay off the repairs, $5,000. Now we are down to this much. And we pay off those closing costs for $12,000. Now we're down to $230,000. And oh, look, that's what they ended up wanting when it's all said and done. So we just checked our math, right? And then in real life, you've told them this is what it would need to sell for. Your next move is to say, well, let's do a search. I mean, let's do a market analysis and see if it's even possible for them to get this much, to sell it for this much. Would it sell for this? And in our research of our market analysis, which we will cover in a future chapter, we find that houses similar to theirs are selling for anywhere between $418,000 to $431,000. So the next question is, how can they be in that upper end of the range so they can get the 426 and change that they need? And it might be that they need to do a little fix-up. They need to do some staging. Maybe they need to pack up some junk and show it better. And it might be that they just don't have enough to offer to get the 426. Maybe they can't do anything better than getting 418. If that's the case, if they need 426.8 in order to end up paying all those bills they have and end up with the 230,000 they want, but the best they can sell for is the 418, then if we were to take that 426,882 minus the 418, they're going to be short. When it's all said and done, instead of them ending up with 230,000, they're going to probably end up with about 9,000 less. Okay, seller, get ready to be happy with 221, because that's probably all you're getting based on my research. Or they could say, well, there's one way we could ensure that we still get it. And then you have a business decision to make. Are you going to help them accomplish their personal goal? Maybe you do. There's nothing wrong with that. I would if there's something else in it for me, case by case. If I don't want to be the guy that rolls over too easy, right? Because why should they hire me to negotiate for them if I can't even negotiate for myself? So I would entertain it though if they use me to help them purchase the next one. Oh, now the total is still bigger. Sure, I'll wheel and deal on this one if I get to help you on the next one for 2, 3, 4%, whatever. That makes sense. The difference in the reason I'm doing step 2 with the 100, that's just talking about how we need to figure out what to divide this total of the dollars by. We need to figure out this $397 needs to be divided by something. And what it needs to be divided by is the percentage of sale price that the seller is left with. So that's why we figure out 100% is the full sale price minus the agent's commission leaves the 93. I'll show you in a slide here in a second. I wrote it out in the presentation that might make it more clear. So bear with me until we see that. Yes, Marcus, good point. We actually do have what's called a seller net sheet, and we'll say, hey, seller, here's 3 scenarios. The standard one that we use is all set up for 3. You don't have to use them all, but you could say, look, if it sells for $426, this is what we can accomplish. If it sells for $420, it would be this. And if it sells for $415, it would be that. I like to give what I think is probably going to happen, maybe the best case scenario, and then something kind of lowball just in case they tell me that time is more important to them than money. Why might time be more important to them than money? Why might it be? Is it always the case that people just want the highest price? Or could there be a circumstance when selling that they're willing to take less? If they get 4 offers, then why would they take a lower offer in price? Okay. Catherine says they already bought a house, basically a timing issue. They may be in more of a hurry. That's a great reason. Definitely. They want to sell faster? Sure. The lower the price, the faster the sale, as a rule. Kids' school schedule. Now we're getting into it. Yeah. Personal need, personal schedule, something that the hassle of dealing with kids out of school, and I can only imagine is not worth an extra $5,000, I guess, in the grand scheme of things. Depends on the price point. But that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's not all about the price in real life. It's about other terms sometimes. All right. Yeah, okay. First-hand experience. Yvonne says that's what she ran into when she sold hers. Yep, you've got to figure out what's important. And so when you're the broker, first lesson, figure out what they care about the most, especially if you're up against other agents. Don't just go in there and start spewing off about you and your company and all your stats. And in the beginning, you don't have any, so you're really bragging about the company's stats. Guess what? You're selling them a vacuum cleaner. Have you ever had a door-to-door vacuum cleaner salesperson or windows, and you're like, I'm kind of interested, but not enough to give up 4 hours of my evening, but I'm kind of trapped at this point. Don't be that salesperson. Be the consultant, not the salesperson. We're selling ourselves, our own reputation as someone taking care of them. We're not selling a house. The minute you start thinking you're selling houses is when you turn yourself into a commodity and you are easily replaceable. You got to be your unique you who are in it for them, who is in it for them. Okay. We talked about measuring, and the recap on the measuring is we pull tape. I gotta find my cursor. There it goes. Around the outside of the perimeter. We've got a couple other rules in that yellow book, like at least 7 feet tall ceilings get included in the HLA. We also measure the area under the stairs is also included in the HLA, heated living area. If it's a bonus room with slanted ceilings, you can't go all the way down to the floor and include that. You have to only stop at the 5-foot high mark and include that width of the room. And unheated needs to be listed separately. It needs to be heated and finished. And also, here's one more thing we didn't talk about. Some houses have a bonus room over the garage. You might have heard it called a finished room over the garage. The acronym is FROG. That house has a FROG. That means a finished room over the garage. And it might be that you can get to that from upstairs. You go upstairs, walk down the hall, go through the door, and there's the finished room over garage. Or they may not have a door. In order to get to that finished and heated room, you might have to go out into the cold garage and go up separate stairs to get to it. It's captured. It's separately accessible from the main house living area. That has to be listed separately. You can't add that extra 400 feet in with the 3,300 total, right? Those little nuances should help you pass whatever they throw at you on the test. How do we end a listing? Our best way is successful closing. That's the best way. Full performance. It could expire. Remember, we have to put an expiration date. There's a lot of expired listings out there. It could be mutually agreed upon by you on behalf of your firm as well as the seller. Hey, let's just not do this anymore. As long as your firm lets them out, they can get out. But they can't get out unless your firm lets them out. Unless your BIC says, yeah, okay, I'll sign off on that. Breach by either party, somebody not fulfilling their end, could result in a dead listing. Destruction of the property, bankruptcy of the seller. I had that happen once. Went to their house with the offer all worked out verbally. They had agreed verbally. Went there to get them to sign it, and they said, hey, we decided we want to do this. We're going to declare bankruptcy and drive off in our RV into the sunset. And I'm like, okay, well, so much for those 5 months that has been marketing. Could I have sued them for having brought them a ready, willing, and able buyer? In that case, probably not successfully, because it was a ready and willing buyer, but they needed to get a loan, and that loan had not been approved. So it would have been hard to prove ability. The ready and willing, sure, but not the able. And then when we're talking about a listing, not a contract, death of the seller will end the listing. Death of the listing agent will not, because they'll just reassign it to another broker within the firm. When you're listing a property, the seller is most of the time required to provide a certain document called a residential property disclosure. Residential Property and Owners Association Disclosure. The acronym is RPOADS, RPOADS in the chat there. Oops, sorry, Heather. Didn't mean to just send it to you. And that is required even if they're not using a broker. However, it's not required all the time. There are some exemptions from having to provide it. One of them is new construction. Brand newly built house doesn't have much to say. It's new. So that doesn't have to provide, that seller or builders, I should say, don't have to provide this thing. Another one, there's about 13 of them, and they're listed. They are referenced on the front of this thing to a certain general statute that has them all listed out. Another one is divorced couples. If one's getting the property in the settlement, guess what? They used to live there and own it, co-own it. Therefore, we don't need to disclose to them. They know what's up. Another one is family sale, exsanguination. I love that word. Blood, right? Blood relative. Then you don't have to do it either. Another one is if you don't want to. If both parties agree that we're not going to provide it, then you don't have to do it either. And then the two most popular that I think apply a lot more, foreclosure. Foreclosures do not require this disclosure. Foreclosures and new construction seem to be the two most popular. And the other thing about this form is we brokers cannot help them. We can't write it or fill it out for them. We can certainly guide them through it, answer the questions. Hey, here's what this means. Here's what it means by polybutylene pipes. What is the age of the roof? Okay, well, when did you do it? Was it the same roof that it was when you got it? Help them kind of figure it out. But you would never take it from them and start checking boxes for them. Not allowed. We as brokers are required to discover and disclose material facts. Today, I spent 2 hours in that CE class just about talking about material facts because that's the number one topic on this year's CE. 47% of disciplinary action got it wrong in the last couple of years. People are screwing up material facts. And so agents don't say that they're supposed to, but they don't say when certain things are wrong. Sellers can choose not to answer the question. They can say, I'm not telling. I know the roof leaks, but I'm not going to go on record and tell. So how do we reconcile those two things? Agents have to discover and disclose, but sellers don't have to tell. Well, we are being hired by them. We're the seller's agent. We're on this listing appointment to be hired by the seller. We owe all of our fiduciary duty to them. While we can't keep secrets about material facts for them, because that would be an illegal directive, right? We have to be obedient to them, but that would be illegal, an illegal thing to obey. We can tell them how this thing works and say, look, guys, here are your choices on this disclosure. 3 check boxes. Yes, there's a problem with this item. No, there's no problem with this item. Or I'm not telling one way or the other. Again, this is what the seller is providing, that 4-page document. They can check no representation on the whole thing. They don't have to tell anything about the property because it goes back to that Latin phrase, caveat emptor. Let the buyer beware. Let the buyer beware of who? Let the buyer beware of the seller because the seller doesn't have to tell them anything. It's up to the buyer to decide to hire inspectors and look at it real close. If they don't want to hire inspectors, well, it's their own risk. Let them beware. Not let them beware of the brokers, though. If brokers know, brokers must tell. So a seller can hide behind this third option, and you have to explain that to your seller. Here are your choices, seller. By the way, don't tell me anything when we walk through the house here in a second. Don't tell me anything that you want to maybe check no representation about, because then you can still check no representation, but it won't do you any good. I'm going to have to disclose it. You're going to have to disclose on some other place, right? What other place might that be? Any ideas? There's no reason for you to know. Just curious if you can imagine. How might the broker disclose a thing they know, a material fact, when the seller is not disclosing it on the disclosure? There it is. Beautiful. Catherine says, a note in the MLS. You got it. That's where we can talk about it. Could also be an email, could be a text to each individual person who shows it, right? Let me see here. How can seller pick and choose when they have representation and not if they have a broker? I might have said something that came across unclearly, and if so, I apologize. So give me a little more on that. And if you don't mind, chat it to my other login so I see it on my other screen so I can read a little better. And then I'll try to figure that out and give you a good answer. Okay. There are a couple other disclosures that are required. So the first one is the residential property one, the 4-pager that they can check no representation about lots of things related to the property, including the owner's association if there is one. So that one is accompanied by this other one that's called the Mineral, Oil, and Gas Rights Disclosure, MOG. The MOG disclosure is a shorter one. It's only like a page. And what it says is, hey, seller, did the previous, no, it's the other one, Holly. Did the previous owner sell off or lease the rights to mine for minerals, oil, or gas? Did the previous person you bought it from sell those rights to anyone? And that seller probably will say, how should I know? I didn't live here then. And they can have the option to check no representation in that case. They can say, beats me. So that's the only place on MOG that gives them the choice to say no representation. But the other items, they have to disclose yes or no. I have sold them myself, or I do plan to sell them before closing or not. And that's all it says. I will sell the mineral rights to someone else, or I plan to. or I have, or I plan to. These two disclosures, that's okay. I can still see it. These two disclosures are required to be provided. Just let me know, maybe a little more clarification of what you mean by the question. These two RPODs and MOG must be given to the buyer before they make their offer. Because if they don't, you're giving that buyer a loophole to get out of the contract. So they've made the offer. You, as the listing agent, forgot to upload these disclosures, so they didn't have them. They didn't get to read the disclosures before they made the offer. And by the way, don't forget, these disclosures could be completely useless. They could all say no representation pretty much. And so for no real good reason, they didn't have them. But if they didn't have them at time of making offer, then when you do give them to them, they've got 3 days of a window that they can back out of this contract that has been accepted, just because you got the disclosures to them late. 3 days, either from the time you gave it to them or the time it went under contract, whichever comes first. They can just say, nope, I don't want to buy it anymore. And that's just the way it is. So don't give them the loophole. Provide this thing, time it right, make sure they get it when they're supposed to get it. Because your seller is in jeopardy. Your seller has to just sit there and wait for that buyer to decide. That buyer might, for some reason, decide to back out, because maybe in the meantime, during those 3 days, a better house for them pops up and they're just looking for a way out. And they would love to have this easy out, because for this little 3-day rescission right surrounding the disclosure, they also get all their money back, even the non-refundable due diligence fee. It's one of the only times that the due diligence fee is refundable, is if they are backing out because the seller didn't get them the disclosure within the 3 days. There you go. Good job. Let me see, catching up in the chat. A way to get the mineral rights after the property has been sold. Oh, interesting. Oh, okay. So you don't think you have them currently. Interesting. I wonder, so do you have a deed that tells you that? You could check with the closing attorney. Certainly going to have to get an attorney's opinion. But I guess one option, hopefully nobody's exercising their right. They're not digging right now, are they? No one's ever dug? I guess just without a law degree, I would guess you could reach out to the one who has the right and see if you could buy it back from them. Or maybe they'll just give it back because they're not using it. But it's the only thing I can figure. But check with the closing attorney that you used, because they might give you the free advice. Always lead with the ones you have relationships with, because you might get little free tidbits here and there. It's your thing. Okay, let me see here. Can the seller take that? Okay, let me re-explain it, and maybe that'll help. And let me lead with the actual document. That might be useful, because this is important, and this is what we're here for. So don't feel bad. If you did feel bad, you don't need to at all. There we go. There we are. So here it is. Here's what this thing looks like. Let me zoom out and then I'll zoom in. Here's the front page. It's got the instructions, how this whole thing works. We'll look at that in a second. At the bottom is where we sign. Page 2 are items about the property, like type of pipes, plumbing, heat, HVAC, foundation problems, and then some of them you notice have no yes or no boxes, because what year was it built? What year was it built? Yes or no doesn't make any sense. But no representation still applies, because you may not know when it was built. Therefore, you check no representation. But we get down here and it says any problem with the foundation Maybe it's kind of sliding down into the ocean. And you certainly, if you knew that for a fact as a seller, would not check no. That would be a lie. You could check yes, or you could check no representation. And so the seller can choose to check any of these things. It has nothing to do with their representation by the broker. It's the seller's responsibility. Yes, there you go. Exactly. No representation could mean I don't know, but I think a loophole was created. I think that was the original intent, was it's basically I don't know. In the case of like an estate sale, you've inherited it from your dad, from your granddad, and you never lived there. You don't really know what's wrong with it because you were never an occupant. And so they gave an option that in that case that you could say, I'm not telling, probably because I don't know. However, the way they've got it written, you can use it as a I don't choose to tell, right? See the difference? So it doesn't matter if you really don't know or not. You can just choose. Like a good example of someone who really does know but chooses to answer this no representation is an attorney selling their own house, right? Who is more of a master of limiting liability than an attorney? And so an attorney might be on a listing appointment to sell their house, and you're sitting there saying, hey, attorney owner, here are your choices. And she might say, wait a minute, you mean that I can check no representation and owe nobody anything and totally have it off my shoulders? I plead the fifth. Exactly. It's just like you're saying that. I plead the fifth. There you go. Round of applause for Holly, ladies and gentlemen. I plead the fifth. And so that's just the way it is. So you want to make sure you explain to your seller client that that is their right before you ruin the right for them. Because if you don't explain it soon enough and they start winking at you, hey, it leaks when it rains. I love that phrase. Don't tell anybody. I'm sorry. I love you and all. We're buddies now because I'm a listing agent, but you just screwed it up for yourself. You can still check no representation about the leak, but I have to tell them about the leak because you just told me about the leak and I'm the broker. I'm held to a higher standard. So make sure you explain how it works before they give you information that you are now required to tell them that might make them mad that you have to tell them. Tell everybody. All right. So again, this second page is mostly items about the property. We talked about septic tanks once upon a time, and here's the item 17. Is there one, and how many bedrooms does it perk for? So it covers a bunch. This tiny print, it better cover a bunch. The next page is half and half. The top half is about the property. For instance, bankruptcy. If you know you're planning to do it, is it in a flood zone? Is there a drainage problem, a soil stability problem? Are there any unpermitted structures? Anything you've ever checked yes for, you would reference here. You'd say, yeah, I answered yes to 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9, and then give a little bit explanation. You could also say, see attached, because I've got a lot to tell you about this thing. And then that's done. The house portion is finished. It starts now with the HOA disclosure. Now you're telling them about, yes, there is a homeowners association, and here's the name of it, and here's how much it costs per month, and here's who you can reach out to get more information, including the covenants and restrictions. Here's the president, and here's their number, and here's the email, whatever you might know. So yes, no, or no representation. Is it subject to covenants and restrictions? Is it a part of a homeowners association? Yes or no rep. Some neighborhoods do not have an HOA, but they do have covenants and restrictions, right? So full disclosure, you're just trying to give as much info as you can if you choose to as a seller. But as a broker, whatever you learn must be disclosed. And then finally, the last page is all about HOA stuff. Like, do they charge you a fee for being a new person in the neighborhood? That's become a thing. HOAs will charge $200, $300, $400, $500. Welcome to the neighborhood. We need to set up your account. Pay us money immediately. As if people already didn't hate them. And then sometimes they charge sellers for leaving. Sorry to see you go. Here's your bill. And checking those fees is often something the seller doesn't really know. Going to have to make a phone call tomorrow with the HOA, find out. is there a fee in connection with transferring the ownership to a new person? Any other special assessments of the neighborhood, not the government. These are special assessments that they're talking about in this case. Any sort of judgments, pending lawsuits. And then also, is the HOA healthy? Are they running their financials properly? Any judgments associated with the association? That's a big one. You don't want to be in a neighborhood and find out after you're the owner that the HOA is upside down and they don't have enough money to put roofs on all the townhouse buildings. Now they're going to levy a special assessment of $300 a month for 5 years to everyone. And you're a brand new owner. Welcome to the neighborhood. So find those things out for your buyer so they don't have those nasty surprises. And then the last half of the last page is what is covered by the dues. Management is typically one of them when there's an HOA. Master insurance is another one that's quite often the case. Common area maintenance, maybe yard maintenance. Maybe it's one of those neighborhoods that mows your grass for you. Street lights, water, sewer, all that stuff. And it might be that they just don't know. Again, maybe they inherited it and they don't want to bother to ask. And so the quickest way is for them just to check no rep for everything. But what would be a downside to checking no representation for the whole entire disclosure? There you go. People are suspicious. What are they hiding? Exactly right. Unwanted attention. Yeah, that too. Best way to ideal perfect world is, at least for decreasing the chance of headache likelihood for you, the broker, is for them just to find what needs fixing and fix it. But sometimes that's pricey, so they want to be strategic. And in a market like this, they can get away with not fixing things quite often. So it's just the way it is. Here is the reference to the general statute that says all of the things that are exempt from this disclosure. And we'll look at that in a minute. And then it just says check yes, check no representation. Those are your choices. But if you check yes or no and something changes to make that wrong, resubmit it, correct it. Don't just go with the original one. If the water heater broke since you last filled this out. The thing in the box here is the part that tells you about the 3-day window. To cancel, owner does not give you the owner's disclosure. Hey, buyer, if you don't get this thing by the time you make your offer, then you can, in certain cases, cancel the contract. You're under contract, but because you didn't get this before you went under contract, then you can cancel it if you mail or deliver your notice to cancel within 3 days after you get it, or 3 days after the contract is formed, whichever happens first. So just know that 3-day number. And again, that means the buyer is out. If they exercise that right, they get their earnest money back and their due diligence money back. Don't forget, anytime you're curious about a general statute, you can just literally put that GS number in Google and it'll come right up. So here's what that looks like. Put that in there and it looks like something like this. You might see a reference to North Carolina General Assembly. And there it is, the exemptions to the disclosure. It's not wanting me to zoom in. But I'll let you do that on your own. But the most common ones, again, are family members, divorce situation, new construction, and foreclosure. Yes. Someone says, so if you're representing the seller, a buyer agent calls and says they think they're going to be putting together an offer, you could certainly send them over to them then. But if you want to save yourself time, you can upload it as an attachment in the MLS and give them direction in the MLS. Hey, disclosures are here. And sometimes they ignore it because there's a little saying that agents don't read. You can write things, but they're not going to read them. They're too busy. But if they do that, I like to also, once I've uploaded it to MLS, I'll go ahead and email it to myself too. So in the case where one of those non-readers reaches out and says, I need the disclosure, you're tempted to say, look in the MLS, don't bother me. But instead, very nicely say, oh, that's okay. What's your email? I'll send it immediately. And bring out your phone and forward that email to them. And let's play nice with the other children. All right, there's no need to start the transaction off with some sort of an ego match to pick a better way of saying what you all know I meant by that. There we go. And then finally, if it's a property built before 78, it is required to include a lead-based paint disclosure. This is not a no representation option. No, if they're in the MLS, could they still claim the 3 days? They would, the way that would work is they would give you the offer and you'd be like, you're the listing agent. This offer doesn't include the disclosure. Before I even present the offer, real quick, I'd reach out to that agent and say, hey, did you not see the disclosure in the MLS? Let me get that over to you so you can include it with your offer and make sure that comes in hot from the very beginning. But that's a good question. You want it to be looked at and signed by them and be a company their offer as well. Okay, so the lead-based paint disclosure, to recap, just says, it doesn't say I guarantee there's no lead-based paint. It does not say that. It's the seller saying, hey, my house was built before 78, so it might be in here somewhere, right? I've painted over it 5,000 times, so it's probably encapsulated and fully safe and probably not going to be a problem, but it might be here. I don't know. And of course, if they do know, because last year they had work done and the contractor tested for lead base and found out, yes, it's there, they have to disclose it. If they know, they have to tell. But if they don't know, they're not required to do a test. And the agents have to sign this lead-based paint disclosure too, acknowledging that they've told everybody as they're supposed to. It's the only disclosure agents have to sign as well. Okay, working with buyers. We have that buyer agency working with agents disclosure page. And so again, before that buyer confides in us, we need to tell them to protect them. Hey, buyer, we're not in stone here yet. You haven't hired me yet. Therefore, don't tell me anything secret. Because if you decide not to hire me, or if I decide not to work with you, wait, what? Why would you decide not to work with me? Well, you might be a jerk. You wouldn't say this, but you're thinking it. Guess what? You can discriminate against jerks. That is not a protected class. If you get an inkling that somebody's going to be difficult, you don't have to work with everybody. You shouldn't, for your sanity, for your mental well-being, right? So you're still working this out. You're thinking about whether you want to work with them just as much as they are with you. And so in the case where it's a unrepresented buyer, we would check that last box on that disclosure so they understand, look, don't trust me because I'm not looking out for you. I'm looking out for the seller. Working as a seller's sub-agent. There is another kind of buyer agency agreement that I don't use, but you could. And it's called a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement. There's an exclusive one and there's a non-exclusive one. The exclusive one says you're only going to work with me. We're married in this real estate endeavor right now. There is an expiration date, but yeah, this is not that. This is saying you can still work with others. We are an open relationship under these terms. So buyers allowed to work with other brokers, and the one who gets paid is the one who is the procuring cause of sale. The one who started the chain of events. They were continuous and they resulted in a consummated transaction. Oops. So it's sort of like an open listing agreement for buyers, but we don't have an open listing agreement for sellers. When it comes to sellers, there is no such thing in this area, and I don't think the whole country. England does it, I believe. But for buyers, this is how that could work. And it's your choice. Does your firm allow you to? Are you willing to? It's a way to get him into something in writing instead of just doing oral buyer agency. So at least you'd have some kind of a commitment, even though it's to you and some others. It's not just completely open-ended, but it's not as good as exclusive buyer agency would be. Speaking of oral buyer agency, this situation where they want to kick your tires, try you out, and you're willing to let them, and the firm allows you to, you could say, hey, okay, I get it. You don't know me. So let me show you what I can do. Let's try this today, and you can see how hard I work for my buyers. Then we'll revisit it and see about putting it in writing. So an express oral buyer agency agreement is just you telling them, here's how agency works. This is this thing called fiduciary, an old car, and I owe all of it to you. By the way, even with oral buyer agency, you owe all of it to them, right? They don't owe anything to you. You could show them 5 houses this morning. They could go to another buyer, maybe their cousin who just got a license, and they're like, well, I know you don't have the MLS access yet, cousin, so I got that dumb agent to show me those properties this morning. I want to buy the 3rd one to write it up. We don't need to worry about them. They agreed to do oral buyer agency, so I'm done with them. That is a real world possibility. So that's the risk that comes with it. So you listen to your little voice and decide what you want to do. It could happen, and it might, quite likely might happen a time or two. But again, it's the grand scheme. It's the long game. The trick with oral buyer agency, again, convert it to writing before you make the offer. You'll never get paid if all you ever are for buyers is an oral buyer agent, because it can't survive the writing of the contract. It can't be something that gets all the way to closing. And then if you've been acting this way as an oral buyer agent, and then you say, look, guys, you fell in love with this house. You want me to write an offer on it? We've got to convert that oral buyer agency thing I've been doing into writing. And they say, what? Why are you pressuring us? No way. Not doing it. If that's what they insist upon, then you are going to become a subagent to the seller. You were an oral buyer agent. Now they won't put it in writing. So now you default to a subagent to seller. And maybe don't get paid because the MLS says $0 to subagents to seller. We're only paying you if you're a buyer agent for your buyer, not if you're helping your buyer as a subagent to seller, right? Alrighty. That buyer agency agreement must eventually be in writing. So let me take a little detour here. If you were to see a test question that said, we don't do true or false, but something along the lines of all agency agreements must be in writing, true or false. What's the answer to that? You got it. Always true. But what about oral buyer agency? You're never going to get paid as an oral buyer agent. It eventually has to get into writing. Yes, we could argue the point. Let me just tell you, the answer on the test is going to be yes, all agency agreements have to be in writing. Jot that one down, put it in the bank, and get those easy points. Must be in writing. Buyer is working with only one buyer because we're talking about exclusive, not non-exclusive this time. And it's very similar to the relationship between you and a seller when you list their home and do an exclusive right to sell listing agreement. So a lot of parallels. We've got a couple cases of working with sellers, not for them, but with them as basically colleagues and representing your buyer. And that's going to be maybe a for sale by owner. The buyer wants to buy something listed by the owner. The owner says, I don't want to pay a commission, a listing commission, a full commission, but I will pay a buyer agency fee. And so brokers are welcome. You might see that on the sign or the ad. They might say brokers protected and brokers welcome. What that means is, while I don't want to pay a listing agent, which would be like double the money potentially, I will pay partial or half maybe, and I'll pay a buyer agency fee because that way I'm going to get some more buyers' attention because I'm willing to cooperate with brokers. That would be a for sale by owner situation. And so you would contact them as the buyer agent and say, look, seller, don't tell me anything that you don't want the buyer to know, but I do have a buyer potentially interested. Let me explain how this agency thing works. You are unrepresented. And I like to congratulate them. Hey, congratulations, you're in the business. We are colleagues. Welcome to the industry. And oh, by the way, you're doing better than most of the agents because you have more listings than them because they got none and you got one, right? So keep it light, keep it happy. Get out there, talk to them before your buyer is with you so that you can control the meeting and make sure that you even look at the house. It might have some surprises that your buyer's not interested in. But what you want to do is say, here's how this works. And oh, by the way, will you pay me a fee? Then sign here. It's called a protection agreement. Write that one down. Protection agreement is what you get signed by the FSBO so they pay you your fee they promised. Now bring your buyer to come look at it because you don't want to bring your buyer without the protection agreement because, hey guys, this is the seller talking, the FSBO seller. Hey buyer, give me your phone number. I'll text you something later. And then they try to go around you. Not every time, but it could happen. So protect yourself with the protection agreement. Get that thing signed. And very carefully, as you're interacting with this for sale by owner, don't let them trust you. Tell them, look, don't tell me anything you don't want the buyer to know. I have to tell them whatever you tell me. You're going to fall in love with me because I'm great and I'm really good at rapport. Yeah, go for it. Well, it does as good as it is for you to enforce it. It's only as good as maybe the buyer ghosts you. How are you going to find out they actually bought it if they won't answer your calls, right? There's no alert unless you look it up later after they've closed. That could happen, but it's going to be later. Did you remember maybe in 30, 40, 60 days to look them up? Oh, shoot, that's that house that was FSBO. And look, there's the name of that buyer. They must have gone around me. Now you'll find out. But only if it's in their name. They might have done it as an LLC and it's not even their name. But quite often it is their name when it's their residence. But now what are you going to do? You're going to stop everything, hire an attorney, go sue them for a commission, or are you just going to try to go get the next one? So it's just a hassle, certainly doable. You would have the documentation to prove it, but do you want to? How much are you going to end up with? You're going to have to pay those attorney fees whether you win or not, right? I guess if you won, you might have a case to not have to pay the attorney fee, or that'd probably be court cost. You'd probably still have to pay the attorney. But, it goes back to that. Do I really want to sue somebody? Because here's what that can of worms looks like. But yeah, theoretically, you're right. And so that applies to for sale by owners, but it also applies to those types of listings that are limited service listings. Because don't forget with those, the broker is being hired for a very specific task, like a singular task. They just want them to put them on the MLS. They don't want that broker to show the house. Well, they'd probably be okay with showing it. They don't want them to deal with appointments or negotiation. It'll say in the MLS, this is a limited service listing. Contact seller directly for all appointments and offer presentation and negotiating. And so what you have is the next closest thing to a for sale by owner. There is a listing agent, but they're not very present. They're not very present. The seller didn't want to pay them full, whatever a full commission might be considered. They're paying them for just MLS access or very few things. And so that listing broker needs to, if that limited service broker if this is a thing they do, they're going to have to do it with a lot of sellers. Because if they're making $500 or $1,000 to list houses, put them in the MLS, they're not going to be available as much as a full service broker would. They can't afford it. They got to be out there scraping and doing more and more and more because it's a numbers game. And so it's hard to give the attention. But at the end of the day, while they can limit their services provided to that seller, that limited service broker cannot limit their responsibility. They do have to answer. They do have to check in. But quite often they don't, and you end up doing more work, you the buyer agent, just to pull it off so your buyer can have a successful closing, and that's just the nature of the beast. So that's how that stuff works with both FSBO and limited service. We'll come back from break. We will push on through, talk about dual agency. I'll see you in 10. Hey, welcome back. Come on back in. About 20 more seconds. Welcome back. First break done. Let's talk about this one. Dual agency is actually the second topic in the CE this year because they can still get it wrong. Brokers are still getting this thing wrong, and it's hard to explain. It's such a weird concept. No other industry, I don't think, has something like this so much. So how does this dual agency thing work again? Since 1995 and buyer agency coming along, it created the possibility that a broker could end up between the parties. Buyer on one side, seller on the other. And they can with permission from their firm in the policy and procedures manual, and with their own permission, their own agreement or willingness to do it, because they may not want to, and with the permission of the parties, both buyer and seller, they and their firm can act as what I call true dual agent, a true dual agent, meaning not designated dual agent. If they're a true dual agent, it is not necessarily the case that one broker is in between the parties all by themselves. There could be multiple brokers that are acting as true dual agents, but however many there are, 1, 2, 3, the whole firm, none of them can give either side an advantage over the opposite side. That is true dual agency. That means loyalty is gone. You're not loyal to one over the other. You can't be. With true dual agency, you have to give them both fair treatment, no preferential treatment. And that's hard for a seller to understand sometimes, because the seller might say, well, you came to me first. I knew you first. You listed my house, and now a buyer calls and you're telling me that you owe them just as much as you owe me in terms of responsibility. And you're saying that's exactly what I'm telling you, because that's what dual agency is. And they say, well, I don't like it. And you say, I don't blame you. It sucks. It's not ideal, but it is what it is. If you don't want me to do it, that's fine. I don't care. That's almost literally how I explain it. I don't sell it. I don't want to. I don't really care. I'll do it. Some brokers won't even do it. And this morning I asked them, how many of you, either because your firm won't let you or because you don't choose to, do not do dual agency? And at least half of them said, heck no, not interested, because probably they had a situation. And inevitably, one of the parties thinks that you're favoring the other party, no matter how hard you work to avoid it. So it's delicate, and that's just the way it is. Dual agency means can't give an advantage over the other side. The clients have to give you permission to do it. You're limiting your service. You're limiting your old car. It's not old car anymore. It's odd car, ODCAR. And your firm should have a policy in place, whether or not they're going to let you do it. And you could have your own personal policy, whether or not you want to do it, even if the firm lets you. So in true dual agency, we've got one firm, because it's an in-house transaction. We've got two clients, buyer and seller. We've got one property. And we have one or more brokers, not just necessarily one. It could be multiple. And that loyalty is gone. No loyalty happening. Can't favor one over another. Then we've got this animal, because quite often when you explain this one and talk about no loyalty, hey, buyer, can't tell you the lowest the seller might take. Hey, seller, can't tell you the most the buyer might pay. And they say, well, that's stupid, not interested. I'm out of here, the buyer says. Going down the street to the other realty firm, going to find myself my very own buyer agent, and I'll come back and make an offer on your property then. You can say, wait a minute, there's another option called designated dual agency. In this situation, we can restore loyalty. We can give you your very own designated buyer agent just for you. It won't be me. I'm helping the seller. I'm the listing agent. You called me, but I can get my BIC to assign one of our other brokers to help you. And now we can treat it like two separate firms. Even though we're in-house, we can treat it like two separate firms. We got one property, one firm, two clients, but now at least two brokers. With designated dual, there's going to be at least two or more. There could be more. This guy over here could have a partner or a team, and so could she. They could both have multiple people helping them. And in this case, this buyer or seller, I guess, would have a whole team of designated seller agents for her, and this guy would have a whole team maybe of designated buyer agents for him. So the number doesn't matter, except when it's designated, it's going to be at least two. When it's true, it's going to be at least one. And then in this case of designated, everybody else in the firm are going to be considered dual agents. Anybody that's not a designated dual in the firm is going to be a dual sub-agent. Now, in real life, they're not going to know the details of this transaction. It's not like they all meet around a conference table and take votes and agree and have to guide these clients. The clients don't know them. They don't know the clients. But their official role in this scenario is, if you're not a designated dual agent in this transaction, but you're in that same firm, you are a dual sub-agent, a true dual sub-agent, right? You can't tell what you might know about either party to the other party. But again, you probably aren't involved in it at all anyway. I think that's what might confuse people, is thinking about like that. Which of the following pairs in a designated dual agency situation is not allowed? Which of these? We got a provisional broker versus any broker in charge of any company. We've got a provisional broker versus their own BIC. We've got PB versus PB, PB versus full broker versus full broker, and full broker versus BIC, their own BIC. Which one is not allowed? On the test, you would never have 6 options, but I just wanted to cover all the bases in one. And there you go, you got it. A PB versus their own broker in charge will not work. All agency agreements must be in writing between the firm and the client. True or false? All agency agreements must be in writing. And don't forget, the agency agreement is between the firm and the client. The front page of that agency agreement does not have your name on it. See if I can find one. Go. Here's an exclusive right to sell listing agreement. And on the very first couple lines, it says, who is it between? Fill in the blank. This seller and this listing firm. Not you. It's the firm you work for whose name will be in this blank. But you are a general agent on behalf of your firm. So when we flip to the last page, notice they reference the firm name, but there's no signature line for the BIC. You're the one who signs on behalf of your firm. So you sign the back page, but it's only the firm name that is on the front page. In other words, it's the firm who owns the listing. And when you leave, you have to say, please, may I take it with me? And they might very well say, that's not our policy. You're choosing to leave us. So you're leaving your 14 listings with us too. And by the way, you can't call your seller ahead of time and give them a heads up. Hey, seller, I'm leaving. Get ready to come with me. Tell my BIC you want to come with me. And ask them if they'll let you out. That's a violation. If you leave your firm, you're leaving your listings potentially. You got to sit back and wait for the BIC to call your sellers and tell them the news. They're going to call your seller and say, she's leaving us. She's no longer with us. And that seller's going to say, oh my gosh, she died. They're going to say, no, she didn't die. She's just leaving us. Just as well have died because she's making a terrible decision. But don't worry, you're in good hands. We'll reassign you to another broker in our firm. Or the seller could say, well, the only reason I hired your firm is because of her, because I trust her. I want to go with her. And in one case I've heard about, the firm replied to them, okay, feel free to leave. We'll let you out for $1,000. You can buy your way out of the listing agreement. Not sure that firm will ever get that person's business again if they choose to do that, but it could happen. But those are all options. Let's talk about commission splits, and then we'll pretty much almost have this wrapped up. Commission splits, how do we end up with the money? So if it's $1 million sale price, let's all pause and fantasize over $1 million sale. That means a 6% commission on $1 million is $60,000 total commission. Going to be shared between the parties. Going to be shared between the two firms. And in this scenario, they're splitting it evenly. Listing firm is going to keep half of it, and they're going to give the selling firm the other half, although that is not required. An even split is not required. It's negotiable. It's whatever you want. You might have some ticked off buyer agents if you make it uneven and they find out about it, but guess what? It's not your problem. That's just business. Guess what? As a listing agent, you're incurring more cost up front. I totally get it as to why you might want to skew it in your favor a little bit, because you took risk and you had to spend, who knows, it could even be a couple $1,000s. Certain listings need more stuff than others. By the time you do fancy photos and a video walkthrough and a 360 tour, heck, the 360 tour could be $200 or $300. You ever heard of that? That's when you can spin it around on an axis with your mouse and look around, sort of a little self-directed virtual tour, maybe even with VR goggles. There's a company called Matterport that sells a $5,000 camera that does these photos, but now the newest iPhones pretty much do the same thing. Sorry, Matterport. Yeah, go ahead. No, it's not the same. Not the same at all. That's huge. There it is. You got it. Yeah. Glad you said that. Good reminder. Selling firm means the firm helping the buyer. The listing firm could also be called the seller's firm, possessive, sellers, apostrophe S, but selling is always the buyer's side. So we got 30 on each side. And now within the selling firm there on the right, what's the split between that human broker and their firm they work for? Well, that broker gets 70% of that selling firm, 30 grand. They're going to get 21,000. The firm's going to get 9,000. Maybe they're experienced. Maybe they've risen and earned the split. Sometimes with some firms, you start out 50-50 and work your way up. And there's a ceiling maybe at 70 or 80%. Sometimes that resets back to 50% every year. It just depends on the firm's policy and if you're willing to do it. But some firms just say, hey, it's 70-30 off the top every time, no matter what, all year long, every year, or 80-20, or 90-10, meaning you bring in commission dollars, you get to keep 80% of it, and we'll take 20% of it off the top, is what that firm might say. In this case, it's 70-30, broker getting 70. But on the listing side, maybe it's a newer broker, or maybe a broker who's on a team. Teams give you smaller percentages, smaller splits, because you're not having to do as much. You're a specialist when you're on a team, as a buyer agent, for instance. If you're a buyer agent on a team, that's all you're doing is working with buyers. You're not having to take them to closing. You don't have to worry about inspections and negotiating repairs. All that's done by a transaction coordinator. You hand the file off once you get them under contract and you get the next buyer lead. You go throw them in your car, pick a house, get them under contract, hand them off to the coordinator, get another lead, get the point. It's an assembly line. It's a well-oiled machine. And so for that privilege, you're just turning and burning, and you might be making 40%, not even 50, but you don't have to do any lead generation. That's expensive. Lead gen is expensive in both time and money, and it does have value to be on a team that does it for you. However, you're not building your name. You're building the team's name. And so if you're a real, true entrepreneur, go-getter, you might last about a year or two on that team before you're just getting antsy and you want to do your own thing now that you know how to work this whole machine called real estate. And a lot of team members eventually filter off and go on their own. Because while they're on the team, again, that split's pretty low comparatively. In this case, that listing broker whose name was on the sign in the yard is getting half. It's a half even split with their firm. So the buyer broker versus the listing broker could get vastly different checks at closing. Depends on their split. Out of all of these items on this page, the buyer and seller have the right to know the total commission being paid of $60,000. They also have the right to know the selling firm is getting half of that and the listing firm's getting the other half. But what they do not have the right to know, it's none of their business, and you're not required to tell them if you don't want to, is how much your split with your firm might be. They might ask you, what do you end up with? What do you split with your firm? And you might say, what's your social security number? When's the last time you went to the bathroom? Yeah, exactly. None of your business. I wouldn't say that in real life, but that's the idea, right? You would say, well, our firm is getting $30,000. No, I mean, what's your split? Sometimes you have to choose how to answer somebody who's asking questions that's none of their business. But the testable item there is that indeed is none of their business. Here's a T formula for calculating commission in dollars. Take the sale price, that's a bottom figure there. A rate is always another bottom figure. So the commission rate, in that case, 6% of sale price of $1 million multiplied together, gave us that $60,000. And then we take it further and take the total commission in dollars times the split percentage to get the split amount in dollars. It makes more sense when we do it with real numbers. But if you're a T formula person, you want to have a collection of those T formulas. Here they are. Let's look at this one. A property sold for $500,000. Seller paid 6%. Commission was split equally between the listing firm and the selling firm. The listing firm split with their broker 50-50. And the selling broker got 70% paid to their firm. 70% of the money paid to their firm. It's what we just saw on the tree diagram. How much did the who receive? Right? Not the Dr. Seuss character, but they might ask you any of these things below with these parameters. If they say how much was the total commission to like one side, to the listing side, that would be 30 each, right? 30,000. How much was the total commission paid off of the entire thing? 6%. That would have been 60,000. I didn't write that one in here. And we just discovered in that tree that listing broker splitting with their firm got 75. No, wait. The 50-50 split, they both got 75. The buyer agent or selling broker got 10,500. Oh, I know. That tree was $1 million. This is half of that. I'm with you now. I apologize. Totally forgot what I wrote. So in this case, it's a price of $500. The total commission would indeed be $30,000. Let's look at it on paper, so to speak. We've got a $500,000 sale price. They're listing at 6%. 500 times 6% means a total commission of $30,000. Now, how are we splitting that 30 up between the listing firm and the selling firm? Let's say 50%. Let's say they each side gets 15,000. And then that splits one more time between the broker and the firm themselves. How much is the firm keeping compared to the broker? And let's say it's an even split. So that would be 7,500 for each over here. And then over here, let's say the broker has a 90-10 split where the firm is only getting 10%, in which case they'd get 1,500 and the broker over here would get 13,500. I think that math works. So that's just how that split process works as a recap. Let me know if you have questions along the way. Okay, we did net math already. We recapped that already. So we're done. Oh, let me show you this. When we're talking about the steps to the net math, seller net math, this is sort of a little graphic showing that total 100% of the sale price. Take away your commission of 7 in this case. That means the seller's portion is 93%. They're split with you. The seller's split with you as the total. The total commission being paid is 7. Seller's ending up with 93. And then from their 93% of sale price, they're going to have to pay of those other various costs, including their loan payoff. So that's kind of how that works. Then we restate this formula. The 372.8 was whatever they added it up to be from the seller's intended net proceeds plus their payoff amount plus closing costs and whatever other expenses we determined they might have to pay. Divide it by their percentage portion of the total to get the price it needs to sell for to accomplish all of those goals. All right, finally, listing agreement is not an offer to sell real estate. Not an offer to sell. It's a chance for you to try to find a buyer. It's an employment contract. It does not obligate the seller to sell, even if an offer meets or exceeds the price and terms. So that's something you can help the seller feel comfortable about. They might say, I'm not sure if I want to list it because if they bring me a full price offer, I don't want to be homeless. I may not want to accept it. And you could say, well, you don't have to. You're always in control. Until the point at which you have gone under contract, you're free to say no because it's more than just the price. A full price offer doesn't mean anything. If they also want the seller to close in 3 days and the seller's like, that's impossible. I have 40 years of stuff. Well, that full price offer is not really worth all that much in that case, right? Full price offer might not also be attractive if the buyer has terrible credit and they're hoping they might get the loan and it's going to take 60 days to figure it out because part of their process is seeing if they get an estate settlement and end up with enough money for down payment. And that seller's like, wait, you 50% chance might not even end up with enough money to go through with this thing. You're wanting me to hold it off the market until then? No, thanks. I do not want your full price offer. It's not worth the hassle. So it's more than price. It's those terms can get creative and that factors into the decision. All right. That is 8. All done. Let's go on straight forward, getting into basic contract law. There we go. Now, got to shift your thinking. We've been talking about listings this whole time with no contract in place. So now we need to shift over to the concept of, oh, that listing is now under contract. A buyer came along, seller accepted their offer, might have taken some back and forth counters, but they accepted at some point. Now we are under contract. Whole different animal. Hippos and giraffes, right? 2 different creatures all together. We're going to learn about the difference between bilateral and unilateral. Auction sales, contract terminology, the big 3 V words, valid, void, and voidable. What an addendum is, what an amendment is, what are essential elements to a contract, what are requirements for reality of consent, and mutual assent. What does that mean? So essentially, the very bare bones, basic level, a contract is promises. Promises from either side to the other side. Legally enforceable promises to do or not do something. Legally enforceable. And in the case of real estate, that buyer's saying, I'll pay you something of value called consideration. And in exchange, seller, you will sign over the deed to me. That's the essence of the contract. And so don't forget these 2 words. You could have an express contract, which could be written or it could be oral. You could have 2 old farmers that lived together next to each other for 50 years, each of them with 100 acres, next door neighbors, and they say, look, I want to sell off 70 because I'm going to retire. I'm going to keep 30. I'm going to sell off 70 of my acres to you. Let's just shake on it, and we'll tell the attorney, and we'll go see him in 30 days after they do a title search, and we'll close on it. Nothing in writing. We'll need to do that. We can do a gentleman's agreement. Can they successfully close in that situation? Shake on it. Nothing in writing necessary. Can we have a successful closing? Sure thing. I got you. I saw that message, Alyssa. An express contract just means that everybody has expressed their intentions. Express just means whether in writing or verbally, orally, they've said what they want to do. And so in the case of those two farmers, nothing in writing, they still expressed their intentions. They still said, let's do this. I'll sell this to you. Here's the price. Okay, sounds good. Let's do it. The question is, could either of them decide to back out before the closing happens? And with an oral contract, the answer is either one of them could back out and there's nothing the other could do about it because there's nothing enforceable in that situation. If all they have is an oral agreement based on a handshake, Judge Judy will throw it out of court. She'll say, show me the contract in writing. And they'll say, we didn't do one. We're gentlemen. We shook on it. She'll say, okay, gentlemen, you may leave because I got nothing for you. I can't enforce something that's not in writing. So while it could be a successful sale and closing, if they all show up and sign the papers at closing and actually do it, sign over the deed, give them the money, yes, that could work. Any time along the way, either one could have chosen not to do it, and there's no consequences for their breach. Because it's not even hardly even a breach when there's nothing in writing. It's unenforceable if it's not in writing. What we definitely can't do that's illegal is an implied contract, right? Based on your actions. Oh, well, he was kind of acting like he wanted to sell it, so I assume that's what he meant. No, it needs to be express. Based on actions and conduct is not good enough. That would be an implied contract. Tell me in real life, I think we've used this example before, but remember the example that you all probably did sometime in the last month at least, where you exercised some sort of an implied contract in your actual life, your experience walking this earth, maybe on the weekend particularly. Yeah. You sat down at that restaurant, that expensive restaurant maybe, and you ordered the best stuff off the menu because maybe it was a date. And they brought it and you ate it, and none of them asked you if you could afford it or if you even had the money or brought your card with you. Because by you coming in, sitting and ordering, you implied that you're going to pay for it. It's a little informal, implied contract. You could easily breach it if you could, on your full stomach, sprint to the door and get out of there before they catch you, right? Some other words when it comes to this contract stuff is related to whose promises we're talking about. Which side made promises? If one party has made promises, that's a unilateral contract. If both sides of the contract have made promises, that's a bilateral contract. A good example of a unilateral contract is an option to purchase. An option to purchase. Any idea? Tell me in the chat, or you can unmute and speak up if you want. What do I mean by an option to purchase? An option to purchase. Do we have a contract? Or do we just have a request to be given some time to think about it? Some time to exercise your option of whether you want to buy it or not. That's what it is. That's all it is. An option to purchase, the idea might be this. What if you have heard that you're an investor and you want to get into commercial real estate and you want to find a property on an intersection? You know that property on busy intersections is more valuable in commercial, especially. Maybe not residential, but certainly commercial. And so you heard that a new road is coming through and it's guaranteed Or no, let's say it this way. It's not 100% guaranteed. They're going to vote on whether they're going to allow it, right? The zoning needs to change in order to allow it. And so you want to lock up the seller in that area and say, hey, seller, I might want to buy your land over here. And I might want to buy it because if they decide to put the road through, it's going to be worth more. But I'm not sure yet. So I don't want to commit, because what if they decide not to put the road in here? Then it's not going to be worth as much as I think it will. Not worth as much as it would be if they do put the road in. So let's just reserve my right to decide that later, and I will pay you for the privilege. I will pay you for the option that I can have to purchase it. And that option might mean that I don't purchase it. But regardless, buy it or not, I'm going to pay you a fee called an option fee so that you'll sit there and let me have time to decide, because I want to see how the vote goes on whether that road's going through. That's an option to purchase. And that's an example for the test. Write it down. What's an example of a unilateral contract? An option to purchase. The buyer's not saying I'm absolutely going to buy it. They're not making the promise to buy it. Therefore, it's a one-sided contract, that option. It's a unilateral contract. The only promise that's happened here is the seller has said, I'll sit back and wait for you, buyer. I'll wait for you to decide if you want to buy it or not. And in the meantime, I won't sell it to anyone else. But the buyer's not making a commitment yet. They've paid for the privilege to have time to think about it. So it's a unilateral contract. Does that make sense? Compared to a traditional contract where they have both said, let's do this. Like me. Finally got the paperwork, guys, for my house. Going to be signing off on that tonight or tomorrow, and then we will be under contract. That will be a bilateral contract. They've agreed to pay me consideration, and I've agreed to show up at closing if it all goes well and sign the deed over to them. We've both made promises. That's bilateral. These two fun words. The word executory means tomorrow, once I've signed that thing, this buyer's already signed it. Once I sign it, what I'll have in my hand is an executor and communicated, which I'll explain in a minute. An executory contract. An executory contract means we're not finished. It's not closed. So that whole duration of the under contract period, during that whole time, the contract is called an executory contract because it means we still have things to do. That buyer's going to have, in my case, 120 days of due diligence period. It's longer for commercial. And they're going to probably do an environmental study. They're going to maybe take some core soil samples to see if the soil can support the whatever they're building. I think it's like a warehouse or something. And zoning, they're going to check specifics about zoning, making sure they can really do with it what they want to, and whatever else they want to check. During that entire time, all the way to closing, what I have in my possession is an executory contract, not an executed one. It's not officially called an executed contract until we have a successful closing. And that's going to be a good day. When I can say this is an executed contract, that means I have money in my hand too, because we're done. It has been consummated, right? I signed the deed over. They gave me the money. I gave them the property. Now that's an executed contract. It's all done. Nothing left to do. It's closed and recorded. So in what format is an express agreement made? Is it in writing when it's express, or is it verbal, or is it either one? Could be either one. Good job. You got it. You got that one. Well done. Express could be either, but you're expressing your intentions. You're stating it. And you can state things in writing and you can state things verbally. All right, here we go. These V words can get you in trouble. They can be a little confusing. So let me change the script. Anybody bought a lottery ticket? Ever bought a scratch off? is it the case, and you have to tell me, it might be some lottery tickets, not others, but is it the case that for some lottery tickets, if you scratch more than you're supposed to, you void it out and now it's no good? Is that true? This is not that. That concept of voiding it out doesn't apply here. It doesn't mean that void means it's unusable anymore. A void contract, whether void, valid, or voidable, any of the three kinds of contracts, and we'll see what they mean in a minute, but all three of them could result in a successful closing. It could be a void contract and you could still have a successful closing. And you're like, dude, it's too late for you to say weird things like that. I know, I'm sorry, but bear with me here. For all three of these V words, what they essentially mean, the difference between them is merely this: which of the two parties can walk away without any consequences? Which of the two parties have the freedom to breach, walk away, decide not to go through with it, and there's nothing the other side can do about it? It's different for all three of them. I'll give you a spoiler alert, little heads up here. When it's a valid contract, neither party can walk away without consequences. They're going to have some kind of thing, something to answer to. They're going to both have consequences if they decide to walk away and not go through with the promises on a valid contract. They're both held. They're both, in both their cases, their feet are held to the fire, so to speak. They're going to have to show up in court maybe. They could get sued. They're going to have to pay some sort of penalty in some way. If it's a valid contract that they back out of, the other party can come after them on both sides. That's valid. When it's a void contract, what do you think it is? Neither side has consequences. They can enter into a void contract and either one can walk away and there's nothing the other party can do about it. So remember the farmers' handshake agreement, nothing in writing, an oral contract, that's a void contract. If it's not in writing, it's called a void contract. And so if either of those farmers choose to not show up on closing day in 40 days, the other guy could be mad about it, but he's got nothing to go to court with. He can try, but Judge Judy's going to say, show it to me in writing. And he's going to say, it was a gentleman's agreement. And she's going to say, next, not interested. That's a void contract. Neither party has consequences for backing out when it's a void contract. And then voidable, as we'll see in a moment, is a one-sided type of agreement, meaning one of the parties can back out and there's nothing the other party can do about it. But the other party cannot back out without consequences. So one of them does have them, the other does not. And it all has to do with whether it's enforceable or not. So we're going to see all of these things in action right now. Here's the valid one. It satisfies all the legal requirements. There are essential elements required for a valid contract, which we'll learn about in a minute. A valid contract is enforceable in court. Judge Judy says, show it to me in writing, and you say, here it is. Here's where they signed. Here it is in writing. And she says, okay, hey guy, you tried to breach this thing. You tried to back out. Well, I have right here that you promised to go through with it, and here's the consequences for not going through with your promises. That's a valid one. It's enforceable for both sides. There are consequences for both sides for not acting, not fulfilling their promises. A valid contract has no legal problems with the written instrument, legal instrument, like a document. The fact that it is a legal document. There's no issues that would keep it from being valid. And it's enforceable by either party. And you're essentially saying you must perform. Both of you must perform or else suffer the consequences. That's valid. Void, again, lacks one or more of those essential elements. Typically, a good example is a verbal oral contract. It's not enforceable. You never even had a contract because it wasn't enforceable and it lacked essential elements. Maybe a better way to say that last line is you never had a valid contract. Therefore, it is unenforceable, right? So in the case of the verbal oral contract, neither farmer has consequences for failing to show up at closing. There's no breach because it was void to begin with. It was never valid to begin with. Another way to say this, there's no contract, meaning there's no paper. So a void contract, you could say there's a problem with the paper. Problem with the paper. There's not any of it. There's some issue with the paperwork. Voidable is about people. A voidable contract means that the parties lack some sort of legal capacity. Legal capacity, write that one down. What is legal capacity? It means somebody is not 18, not sane, or not sober. Being 18, sane, or sober is required to have the legal capacity to enter into a contract. Does that mean you can't get into a contract if you're 17? No. It just means that the other party might not want to get into a contract with you because if you're under 18, you have voidability. You can choose to walk away and there's nothing they can do about it because you are not legally, you don't have legal capacity. Yes, you could actually close on it. Let me use this example. I am a viewer of YouTube videos. It almost doesn't matter what they are. I'm fascinated by the medium. I like the stories of huge success. And one of the ones I found many years ago was this kid that was jumping on trampolines. At the time, he was 16. He had 10,000 subscribers. He would jump off the roof of his house. I don't know what his mother was thinking, and land on the trampoline and do a perfect backflip and be perfectly healthy. And he did even more crazy stunts than that. And you can imagine people loved it. A year later, I was still tuning in a couple times a month, seeing how things were going. He was up to 1 million subscribers. He bought his mom a $400,000 house. He bought himself a $160,000 sports car. If that kid at that point, being 17 years old, knocked on my door and said, hey, you've got 5 acres. I could fill up a lot of trampolines on this property. I want to buy it. Would I sell it to him? Sure, I'd consider it. If he's spending $160 for a car, maybe he'll give me what I want for my property. And if I did, here he is, 17, underage, agreeing to pay me for my house. And we get into a contract. We sign it. On paper, it looks official. It is official. But it is a voidable contract because he is considered not of legal capacity because he's underage. Could he show up to closing and sign off or bring me the money and I sign over the deed to him and we're happy and successfully close it? Yes. You can close a voidable contract. By the way, you can also close a void contract. So in this case, voidable means problem with the people involved. The problem is he's only 17. The problem with that is, as a legal adult on the other side of him in the transaction, if he chooses not to buy it, because guess what? Some 17-year-olds change their mind frequently. Some, not all, some. Maybe he doesn't show up. Can I go after him over that in court and say, you promised to show up, I'm suing you? No, because it's a voidable contract. That was the deal when I entered into it with him. I knew, I'm subject to his integrity because I got no enforceability. Because even though we signed the papers, he's underage, lacks legal capacity, and therefore it's voidable. So that's what I mean by one side has no consequences. He has no consequences for backing out if he wants to. However, let's say I'm in this with him and I choose to not sell it to him. Maybe 4 weeks into the transaction, I'm like, he hasn't even done any inspections yet. I've seen him put out like 10 more videos in the meantime. He's clearly not even thinking about this transaction. I'm kind of nervous. I should have never done it. But I've got this other buyer who said they're interested and they seem more stable. They seem of age, and I really think I want to just sell to them. Let me just back out of this one. As a seller, it's tough to back out of a contract. It's not just a matter of money up front. You could end up getting sued, and he could do that to me because I'm of age, of legal capacity. So he would have the freedom to enforce it against me if I tried to breach and not sell it like I promised. While I would not have that same privilege. because I chose to sell it to a minor. So it applies in the minor situation, but we have two more words here: intoxicated and mentally ill. 18, sane and sober. Let's talk about sober. You show them 20 houses all day Saturday. They like the 17th one. They still want to see 3 more just in case. And you do. And now it's 7:00 at night. And you say, okay, we're both tired. Congratulations. Let me see if I can get this offer put together for you. This is you, the buyer agent, talking. Let's go to the restaurant and I'll sit there at the table while I fill out the paperwork. We'll eat real quick and then you can sign the paperwork. And you sit there filling out paperwork and he orders a pitcher of beer. And by the time you're done with the paperwork, he's in a couple of shots, most of the pitcher. And so you're like, okay, this will be easy. Sign here, here, and here. And he does. And you send that offer over and it gets accepted immediately. And they send it, sign it, send it back to you. And now you're under contract by 11 p.m. The next morning you wake up really happy because you're going to have a closing hopefully in 30 days. And he doesn't call you because it's still too early. He's still sleeping it off. Around 1 p.m. he calls and says, dude, what did we do after that last house? I don't remember. Wait, what? I signed a contract. You know what? That was a terrible mistake. I don't want to do that anymore. It's voidable because he signed it while not sober. So that's one possible. If he could, he would. And now you're thinking, well, what was it need to bring receipts from Chili's proving how many beers he bought? Well, there would be a process of proof, of course. Take it to court, that kind of thing. But the point is, was he sober when he decided to enter into it? If he could prove that he was not, it's a voidable contract. And then also mentally ill. This is a true story, not from my own experience, but hearsay. And what happened was a gentleman, an older gentleman, went into a real estate office. The agent at the front desk, who was there for such occasions, any sort of walk-in traffic, that was her responsibility that day. She met with him in the conference room and he answered all her questions. He said all these things about real estate. Let me finish this little story and we'll take our break. And she thought, wow, okay, he really knows what's up. He used to be in real estate. And so she takes him out, shows him 3 houses, and he's excited about one. And he says, what do we need to do to make an offer? And they do. And he writes the check for earnest money. And she submits everything and it goes under contract on a Saturday. Fast forward to Monday, or let's say Wednesday. She hasn't heard from him. Then an adult lady walks in the door, says, may I speak to so-and-so? And that agent comes and talks to her. And she says, did you meet a gentleman over the weekend on Saturday and show him houses? And she's like, yeah, Mr. So-and-so. Yeah, he bought one. He's a great guy. Looking forward to, I'm his daughter. Okay, nice to meet you. And I am in charge of his affairs because he has dementia. And he did real estate for 40 years, so he knows all the terms and he has moments of clarity. And you got to experience that on Saturday. But let me tell you this, I saw the earnest money check clear and I'm in charge of his affairs and he's not buying anything. You're going to have to tell that seller you have a voidable contract because he was not mentally healthy. So that mental illness, it makes it voidable. That's not a great position to be in. Now you got to give people some bad news. And sad on top of that, I had an older gentleman just walk in my house randomly a few years ago and looked very confused. Come to find out that had happened. He had wandered away from his house, from his people. And I don't live in a neighborhood, so it was scary to think what kind of traffic he had navigated through to end up at my house. But we got him squared away. So that makes it voidable, one-sided. Yes, that gentleman and his daughter, the daughter could have said this. She could have said, you know what? I got to give it to him. My dad can't take care of his own affairs, but in that moment of clarity, he picked a great house. Let's do this thing. I authorize it. And they could successfully close. Or old boy who drank the pitcher of beer could say, you know what? I don't remember anything about last night, but tell me more about that house. Oh yeah, I do like that. Yeah, let's just do it. Even though I signed it while drunk, we can still close. It's still closable. That's the important thing that they can get you with on the test. So regardless of its status, valid, void, or voidable, regardless of these 3 V words, any of them can successfully close. They like to test you on that. Look out for that. It all comes back to, can the parties walk away without consequences? In a valid one, neither of them can walk away without suffering consequences. They can walk away, but they're going to pay for it. In a voidable one, only one of them can walk away. And then that one in the middle, void, both of them can walk away without anything the other can do about it. All right. I'm going to keep talking when I come back. I'll see you in 10 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. Hope that makes sense. Are we okay with this valid, void, voidable concept? Doesn't mean that void means it's not closable. That's the biggest lesson there. You can still close these things. It all goes back to whether or not it is enforceable in a court of law. So with regard to that void example of an oral agreement, oral contract, not written, closing is still possible. It has the elements of a valid contract, but it's not in writing. And again, not enforceable between the parties. Judge Judy could say, get out of here, but parties could still choose to close on it. But neither party could sue the other one for something called specific performance. That's the breach. That's the remedy available to a buyer if a seller tries to back out. So in the case of an unenforceable agreement, could be voidable. Could be void or voidable. Neither party can sue for performance. In the case of a void one, only one party could sue for performance in the case of voidable. That 17-year-old buyer could sue me if I choose to back out or try to, but I couldn't sue them for not going through with the sale. Some more terminology. These are easy points to get. If you're writing an offer, there's a standard offer to purchase that you use. You could use multiple things, by the way. There's lots of contracts available out in the world. Your client could actually have an attorney make one up. And as long as they put certain 19 provisions in there that are required for you to be involved, then yes, you could say, yep, fill in the blanks. We'll fill in the blanks here, here, and here. But the contract that we use the most looks like this. There we go. It's called the 2T, Form 2T. You'll never be tested on form numbers, but you'll hear me talk about it. And this is the one. Let me see if I can, come on now. No, I like my zooming capability. It doesn't want me to zoom. It's 16 pages. It's got a variety of things. Here's where we put the price and the deposit money. On this side over here, it talks about earnest money. We get a very detailed exposure to this contract when we take post 302. So we'll save that for later, but just pointing out here, there are certain provisions in these 16 pages, but not every possible thing, right? They've got things about fixtures, the bullet list. I think we took a peek at before. What is a fixture? We've got the process of due diligence, how the buyer has the right, there we go, to do inspections or review documents and do insurance, get a check and shop for their insurance policy, appraisal, survey. So the right of the buyer to do their due diligence. Closing is going to be accepting the property in its condition in that moment, unless other sort of provisions are made. What kind of financing is the buyer using, if any? Is it going to be cash or is it going to be financing? Although this is not a financing contingency, it's just an FYI. We're telling the seller, here's what we're thinking about how to go about purchasing your property. It's going to be using an FHA loan or a conventional loan or a VA loan. It's got things about the disclosure statement. It says, has the buyer received it or not? Remember that part from first hour where we learned that if the buyer does not see that disclosure at time of making an offer, then they have 3 days to back out once they do receive it. Well, here's where we acknowledge if they have it at time of offer or not. As their buyer agent, we're going to check, nope, that seller's agent, that listing agent did not give it to us in time when we made our offer. Therefore, we're checking this box. The buyer has not received it, and therefore they can back out without penalty, including a refund of any due diligence fee prior to the end of the third calendar day of receiving it or effective date, whichever comes first. It talks about the mineral oil and gas rights separately, but it's basically the same idea. The 3 days still applies. What is the buyer responsible for? The various charges they're going to have to probably pay associated with this purchase. What's the seller representing? Have they lived there for longer than a year or less than a year? Or do they even own the property? Tell us about the homeowners association. You get it, right? There's a lot of things here, but you can't possibly fit in 16 pages all the possibilities, and that's why there's this other section right here that says, if we need to add more provisions to this offer to satisfy the buyer's intentions, we're checking them. Here they are. Here's what else is attached to this thing. And we've got a variety of them. We've got something called an additional provisions addendum that has 6 possible things we might want to add. We're going to look at it. We might need more signatures. We almost needed that for my sale because we got 4, both of me and my brother and our wives. But the line for seller is just enough size for all of our names to fit, so we're not going to bother with an extra document. If it were like 6 or 8 people, we'd probably need this thing. It's just a way to have more places for people to sign without cramming it into the margins. We want to keep that contract legible. Make sure everybody understands it. A backup contract addendum. We'll talk more about these addenda later, but my point here is look at the words in common. Addendum, addendum, addendum. Because it says this, check all standard addenda. Addenda means more than one addendum that may be a part of this contract and attach here too. These addenda are what we attach to the offer. If we're making a change to an offer or adding more elements to it, like these we're looking at here, or anything, because we can check this one down here that's highlighted, any extra thing that you might have had an attorney draft that's custom made to accomplish some unique thing the buyer wants to add in. All of these sorts of things are addenda that you would add. What do you add addenda to? That's the test question. You add it to an offer, not a contract. What is an offer? It's what starts the process. Know the difference between an offer and a contract. Know the difference because they like to get you on that. And when you're tired, mentally tired, second, third hour in, and the test question is talking about in an offer to purchase, blah, 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 blah. Stop, drop, and roll. No, that's not it. Stop, take a breath, and think, wait, is it an offer or is it a contract? Because those are 2 different answers, right? The answer to the question is going to depend on which status we're in. Here it is. Here's the closing date. Here's the time we had it listed. The property originally got listed for sale. Here's the amount of time that it was shown. And then here's when an offer to purchase came in, maybe sometime after the listing. And then maybe multiple offers to purchase came in and it took them a while to finally pick one. And then they finally do. And so this entire period of time, because here's where we went under contract. This entire period of time is the offer period. No commitments are made, just promises proposed. Just proposals, not marriage yet. This is engagement, right? This is, hey, what do you think about doing this? And you're waiting for the other party to decide. The other party might say, no, I don't like that idea. What about this idea? They just made a counter proposal, counter offer. So there's this period of time, the offer period, during which if you want to add a provision to it, that provision is going to be called an addendum. You're adding something that didn't originally fit in the original standard 2T document or whatever the offer contract thing was. Now, once everybody agrees and we are officially under contract, now this period of time, we have a contract. It's also called the executory period, to go back to one of those words we saw earlier. It's also the time that you're going to have inspections done, appraisal, survey, the loan process, loan application. You got a lot of wheels spinning, a lot of plates spinning. We're waiting to see any of these things going to cause this to fall through. And so typically with regard to the inspection, there need to be some changes to the contract. How so? How could an inspection of the property result in changing the contract? What sort of circumstance would cause that? Marcus says mold. What about mold? Good job. More than 1 square foot, we have a material fact, and we might ask that seller to pay for some stuff, Yvonne says. Catherine says money for repairs. You got it. Oh, wait, I'm the buyer. I made you an offer last week, but now that I've had the inspection, you see, my offer was with the understanding that this house was in good shape. But that inspector looked under the hood, and we have some problems, and I don't want to pay that price anymore. I want you to make it up to me that your house needs work. And so the options are, based on the inspection, we could have the seller make some repairs. We could have the seller pay someone else to make repairs, or we could have the seller to give money to the buyer in the form of paying some of the buyer's closing costs, or maybe in the form of lowering the sale price. I promised to pay you $430, but I didn't know you needed all new windows. That's like $10,000. So how about I pay you $420 instead of the $430? It could be any of those things. We could change the price. We could have closing costs paid for the buyer on behalf of the buyer, paid by the seller. And so regardless of which of these things happen, what document enforces it? Well, not the original one, because we didn't address it in the original one. We didn't know about it yet. So the document that you need to add to the mix would be some kind of an amendment. So when we're changing a contract, we use amendments. When we're changing an offer, we use addenda. Easy points to get. Just have those words straight. I don't know. I just think adding to the offer, first 3 words of addendum. Then I think when it's a contract, it's not necessarily that we're adding to the contract, we're changing it. And changes are done with amendments, like the amendment to the Constitution, changed provisions of the Constitution of the United States. Amendments make changes. So amendments are changing a contract. Addenda are adding elements to an offer. So know that difference between those stages. We've said this already. Don't forget it. Write it down if you didn't already. Regardless of void, voidable, or anything unenforceable, even though it's not enforceable, it could still successfully close as long as the parties are cool and willing to do so. Buyer's still willing to bring the money. Seller's still willing to sign over the deed. Can still close even if it's void or voidable, unenforceable. It just means along the way, somebody's at the mercy of the other. Maybe both at each other's, or maybe only one party. Okay, here's a nuance. We just said, you tell me, don't read this yet. Remember the example of the gentleman, the older man, dementia guy? What is it called if he enters into a contract? What kind of contract is that? Void or voidable? Which one is it? Is that? That's voidable because it's a problem with the people. Legal capacity, not 18 or sane or sober, one of those. In this case, the sane one. So who determines that? Who determines if someone's not able to handle their affairs? Let me ask it more specifically. In the beginning, who determines it? What's the first way we figure this out? Probably medical diagnosis, right? A doctor probably says, yeah, it's looking like he's not all there. He's probably needs some help. If it gets bad enough, who could step in and say, absolutely, for sure, we got to make sure somebody is officially looking out for their affairs? Who says, yep, this person needs full-time someone in charge of their affairs stepping in legally? That would be a court order or a judge. Yeah. That's a difference when it comes to the void and voidable words. If the doctor or anything short of a doctor, medical diagnosis, is saying this person is incapable of handling their own affairs, it's a voidable contract, as we know. Problem with the people. But here's the little asterisk. If it has gone to court, it's gotten so serious that a judge has intervened, a court order has been made saying, oh, now your adult daughter needs to handle your affairs. Now, if they enter into a contract, it's not called voidable anymore. It would be called a void contract because the court order has been issued. I can't go much more into the why. I can just tell you this is a testable thing. And just know, look in the test question, are they talking about a judge or a court order? Then it's going to be void instead of voidable. But if they don't specifically talk about a judge or a court order being involved with this mentally incapacitated person, then it's going to still be voidable as you originally learned. All right, so just look for those words. It's going to make a difference between the answer void versus voidable. We okay there? They're deemed by court to be incompetent to handle their own affairs. That contract is not voidable. It's considered void. Here are the essential elements that make for a valid contract. In order for that contract to be considered valid, it's got to have these provisions. It's got to be offered and accepted mutually. This is what we're going to do. It's kind of the idea. Hey, guys, let's do this thing. Mutual assent, offer made, acceptance of offer made. Also, some item of value. That's all consideration means. Consideration, what is not? What is consideration not? Consideration is not earnest money. Write it down. Consideration is not earnest money, and it's not due diligence money. Those are legally considered other things. They are not legally considered the consideration. The consideration is what you're bringing to closing in the metal suitcase that's handcuffed to your wrist. Just kidding. Don't bring cash. The consideration is what you're paying for the property at closing day, paying in order to get that deed signed over to you. The earnest money is not consideration. That's good faith money. It's standing behind your promise to go through with this thing. It's showing how serious you are, that you're going to be so serious about pursuing this and seeing if you can buy it and get qualified and do the inspection if you still want to buy it. You're so serious that you're willing to set aside an amount of your own money out of your reach. But that money still belongs to you. You just cannot immediately access it. You're letting someone else keep it for you in an account that you have no access to. It is not legally considered consideration. It gets confusing, I know, because I've also told you that the earnest money does count toward the buyer's side as a credit at closing. So it's like it converts to consideration at closing day, but until closing day, on the test, if you see what is earnest money, the best answer choice would be something like good faith money, something like that. But it is definitely not consideration. Consideration is the exchange of the thing of value for the property on closing day. And then due diligence money is also not consideration either. It's a non-refundable amount of money you're giving, not even just showing, but you're giving it to the seller to basically say, please pick me. Please pick me. I'll give it to you. You don't have to give it back to me. Just pick me above those other 10 offers. I asked them this question this morning, how many offers are you seeing making out there on behalf? And I saw an average of 5. Buyer's agents having to write 5 offers before something gets accepted. I think I might have seen a 3, but I saw 18, saw 14. Picture this. You're a buyer agent for a buyer and everything's great the first time. You write that offer, everybody's excited, but they don't get it. The seller picks one of the others and the buyer's like, oh man, all right, well, let's try again. You go back out, you look at some more, they try again. They lose that one. Oh, gosh, this is not as fun as it looks on TV. Okay, let's try again. Need to buy something. Maybe around the 7th or 8th time, they're like, do we even want to do this anymore? It gets a little awkward. You become a cheerleader, right? You got to be a broker. You got to be a marriage counselor. You got to be a psychiatrist, and you have to be a cheerleader to keep them motivated to keep trying, if that's in their best interest. But eventually they might burn out. So the way they break the tie in these multiple offers is giving more non-refundable due diligence money to the seller. That's one of the 2 checks they write when they go under contract. The buyer says, here, seller, I'll write this check. And by the way, that due diligence check is made directly to the seller's name. And that seller does not have to give it back. We'll talk more about it in a minute. So that earnest money and due diligence, neither of those are what we were talking about with this word consideration. Consideration is the full lump sum total you're bringing and giving to that seller at closing. And it's going to be composed of your down payment as a buyer and also the big chunk that you're borrowing from the lender. They're sending in a big wire or check to the closing attorney to hand over to the seller at that settlement, at that closing. And all of that added up together is the consideration. Competent parties. In order for it to be an essential element to a valid contract, the parties must be competent, 18, sane, and sober. And it must be for a lawful objective. If you have a dispute with your seller on the other side of the transaction, so much so that you go to Judge Judy and you say, Judge Judy, this person is misbehaving. I want you to enforce this contract. I'm trying to buy this meth house in the middle of the marijuana field, and they are trying to breach. She's going to say, A, unenforceable because it's not an essential element to a valid contract, and B, see the bailiff. They have a couple questions for you on your way out, and you might not be going home. But lawful objective must be for a legal purpose. These 4 are essential elements to make this a valid contract. If it lacks one of these essential elements, it's not a valid contract. So keep that in mind. This mutual assent thing, again, one party's making offers of terms and price, sends it to the other party. Via the agents, maybe, but not necessarily, because you can have an unrepresented seller selling to an unrepresented buyer. They're not necessarily the case that an agent is involved here. They make the offer, and the receiver of that offer maybe decides to accept it as written. Both parties agree to terms. And that's what this thing is called, meeting of the minds. Mutual assent means everybody's on the same page. Yep, I'll take this. I'll give you that. Let's do this. We have a meeting of the minds. We have mutual assent between the parties. Offer made, acceptance given. Sometimes an offer is made and an acceptance is not given. Buyer makes an offer and the seller says, you're close, but not quite. I want another $10,000. I don't want to close in 30 days. I want to close in 45 days because I need time to find my next place. And I want you to pay for a home warranty. No, that'd be the seller. Seller's response. Seller's like, nah, and I want you to promise not to ask me to fix anything. That could be a counteroffer. If an offeree changes anything, write this one down, any changes made constitute a counteroffer. Why is that a big deal? Because a counteroffer is a rejection. A counteroffer is first and foremost a rejection. So, as the broker, you want to make sure your client who is considering the offer that you've brought them understands the gravity of this. because that seller might say, okay, I see the offer that you just sent over, and I like the price, I like I like the everything about it, except they want to close on April 27th, but that's my dog's birthday, and that's a holiday to me, and I don't want to close. I'll close on the 28th, but not the 27th. So I'm going to scratch through it and write in the 28th and initial it. They just made a counteroffer. And you're like, no big deal. Well, they just rejected the original offer. And so if you have them sign that and send it back over to the buyer could say, wait a minute, the 28th, that's my dog's birthday. That's why I picked the 27th. I'm out of here. I'm not buying it. They walk away. I know that sounds silly, but there have been just about as silly of a reason that a buyer or seller has walked away. The point is, hey seller, are you sure you want to counter based on something so silly? Are you sure you want to risk that buyer walking over a date? Well, sure, why not? What's the worst they can do? We could just go back to the original offer. That's the point. No, you can't. Can't go back to the original offer if you reject their offer. And you rejected it when you made the counter offer. So they need to understand the gravity of that. Yes, sure, the buyer could decide to reinstate the original offer, but it's not required. They could certainly say, you killed it when you countered, and I'm offended, and I'm out of here. There's plenty others for me to buy. In a different kind of market, they might say that. They might say it now if they're serious enough about the issue. So what else is it about counteroffers? Whether it's a counteroffer or an original offer, the one making it can always get out of it as long as it hasn't been accepted yet. Right? Another way to ask that is, how long is an offer good for? As long as it takes for you to either get it accepted or decide to rescind it. The offeror is the one making the offer. The offeror, the one who's making the offer, that could be the buyer or it could be the seller. The buyer's the offeror when they make the original offer to start this process. But when that seller makes a counter, now they have made a counter offer. Now they are legally called the offeror. None of this matters much except through this class. Because in real life, if you're talking about these terms to this level, you need to refer them to an attorney because there's some sort of legal trouble coming along. So just know that an offer can be withdrawn before it's accepted. Any time up until the point that the other side accepts it, it can still be withdrawn. And that might apply in real life if the buyer says, okay, we made an offer on that house A yesterday, but a new one came into my email today. I want to go look at it. I think I'm going to like it better. I think I want to try this new listing instead of that one. Can we get out of that one? And as long as you haven't had that accepted yet, yes, I'll go ahead and tell the listing agent that that offer is now off the table, that you are rescinding it because they haven't accepted it yet, right? So a counter, again, is a rejection of that original offer and then the creation of something new, even so it's just so simple as a date change, any change. Okay, now we're going to talk about the C word because I've been throwing around offers and acceptances for a little bit, but it's even more involved than an acceptance. It also includes communicating the fact that it was accepted, right? So buyer makes an offer. Seller receives that offer. Here's our buyer agent who writes that offer up on behalf of the buyer. Here's our little offer to purchase document with the buyer's signature on it. And then here's the listing agent helping the seller. So that buyer agent sends the offer to purchase over to the listing agent. That listing agent forwards it up by email to the seller. The seller says, I will sign and accept your offer to purchase, and I've signed it, and I'm happy. As written, great, let's do this. That seller then communicates the fact that they accepted the offer back to their listing agent. Here's the question. Are we under contract? We have offer made. We have acceptance and we have communication, but it's from the seller to their listing agent. That's the only level of communication we have so far. Do we need to communicate further to someone else? This listing agent needs to communicate over to that buyer agent. Now we've communicated across the fence, across this net, this tennis net, this volleyball net. That is the communication that matters. Once this communication has taken place, we are officially under contract. Once this communication across the line of battle, so to speak, has taken place, we are officially under contract. Even though maybe this paperwork has still not yet been sent over here, maybe the email has not been sent, it doesn't matter. It was signed, it was accepted, it was communicated, we're under contract. Now, how enforceable is it? Well, does this really exist? Did they really sign it? Maybe not. Maybe they lied. So that would remain to be seen. But officially, if they did sign it, eventually it's going to get over here. And this point of communication is hugely important. It's offer and acceptance, but it's also communication of that acceptance. Communication is the key. That's the big difference. Okay. With that said, let's back up. In the next scenario, we just worked under the assumption that this selling agent helping the buyer was a buyer agent. They signed a buyer agency agreement. They said, here's how we're going to do this. You are all mine. You owe me all of old car. And the agent's like, it sounds great to me. I have other buyers too, by the way, but I want your full loyalty. I'll give you loyalty. You'll be loyal to me. We are a real estate marriage right now. Let's say that's not the case though. They said, put on the brakes. I'm not signing this thing. I'm going to use this other option of being a sub-agent to seller. That's what they are automatically if they refuse to sign buyer agency. So let's say the scenario is these people are involved. A sub-agent to seller is who's helping this buyer because that buyer won't sign buyer agency. They write up the offer to purchase. They send it over to the listing agent. Here's our offer to purchase. Sends over the listing agent, sends it up to the seller. Seller signs it, sends it back to the listing agent. Are we under contract? No, still not, because it's on the same side, and that's not communication that counts. It needs to cross the line of battle. So the listing agent tells the sub-agent to seller, hey, we have a deal. They signed it. But you tell me, are we under contract? Is it different than if that person were a buyer agent instead of a sub-agent? Yeah, absolutely. Because telling the sub-agent to seller is not good enough. If this buyer is being represented by a sub-agent to seller, it's not having been considered communicated until they tell the buyer. The buyer's got to know. When it's a buyer agent, telling them is the same thing, just as good as telling the buyer. They are beholden, obligated. That communication is good. But in this case, not good enough. And so a way that this could matter is the buyer's going away on a trip, out of cell service, going camping in the mountains, and they say to their selling agent, who is a sub-agent to seller, hey, take that offer, submit it while I'm away, and then on Monday, let me know how it goes, and I'll hopefully have bought a house. And so then they go out of cell coverage. The sub-agent passes the offer over to the listing agent. Saturday, the seller signs it. Sunday, the seller gives the listing agent the news. I signed it. I accept it. And then the listing agent calls the sub-agent to seller Sunday night and says, hey, they signed it. We have a deal. And the sub-agent says, let me call the buyer real quick because we don't have a deal until I tell the buyer. And just as they expected, they can't reach them out of cell service. Do we have a contract? No, because the buyer doesn't know yet. Monday morning rolls around. Buyer gets back in town, gets back in cell service. The sub-agent to seller did not leave them a message. Painting a fun situation here. The buyer calls the agent. And before the agent can say anything to the buyer, The buyer says to them, hey, you remember that offer? Cancel it. I'm out. I want to live in the woods. I don't want a house. I don't want material possessions. I'm selling everything. I'm going to live in a cave. We do not have a contract. They backed out before they were communicated to. I know. Seller's like, wait, what? Yeah, sorry. So in this scenario, if you're a sub-agent to seller with news, you're waiting to give the news to your buyer that the offer has been accepted, then always answer your phone by saying, we have a contract, they accepted it. Don't let them talk to you first. I'm kidding. But the point is, that's kind of how that timing could work, right? It depends on that communication. And we've talked about this. Withdrawing or revoking the offer before it's accepted and communicated terminates it. It terminates it. You are not obligated in that case. Consideration is typically money in the form of a check. Anything you're bargaining and exchanging for, you're trading the deed for the consideration. But earnest money is not it. That is not considered consideration. It's also not required. You still have a deal. You still have a contract, even if there's zero earnest money. And by the way, due diligence money is also not required. Earnest money is just an expression of your intentions. How serious are you? So serious, I'm willing to set aside my money out of my reach for the duration of this executory contract. At closing, it'll count toward a credit to me, to my side, but until then, I have no access to it. Capacity of the parties means 18 sane and sober. We know that already. And then that fourth essential element is lawful objective. Must be for a legal purpose. If it's for an illegal purpose, or if it's something involving discrimination, fair housing discrimination, it's not enforceable. The court won't enforce it in either of those cases. And this is my example. I already told you about the YouTube millionaire. It'd be avoidable contract because they are underage. Here's another very testable thing. Easy points, guys. Easy points. When must offers be delivered? As soon as possible or immediately, but not later than 3 calendar days. I think it's 3 days because we used to mail things. People don't mail things so much. They email things. Now it can be literally almost immediately again or right away. But the answer on the test is going to be answer choice. Immediately, 3, 5, or 7 days. When must offers be delivered? Best choice out of those? Immediately. What if the options they give you are when must offers be delivered? 3, 5, 7, or 9 days. There's no immediately in the list. Then the best choice is the 3. So test-taking skill, right? Test-taking skill is going to get you through there. So things must be in writing in order to be enforceable. We've talked about that. Judge Judy doesn't like it if it's not in writing. There's a word for that. There's a phrase for that. Certain documents, like contracts, must be in writing to be enforceable as per something called the Statute of Frauds. Statute of Frauds is what says if you want to enforce something in a court of law, get it in writing. Leases need to be in writing to be enforceable. Contracts need to be in writing to be enforceable. That's all because of the Statute of Frauds. However, those agency agreements we talked about last chapter, listing agency, buyer agency, they do in fact need to be in writing, yes. But the test question is this: why do they have to be in writing? When it comes to agency agreements, it is not because of the Statute of Frauds. That's not what requires them to be in writing when it's agency agreements. What is it? It's real estate commission says so. The commission rule says it must be in writing to be enforceable. Agency agreements must be in writing because the commission says so. So know the difference. There's certain things that must be in writing to be enforceable because of the Statute of Fraud, like contracts and options to purchase, for instance, but not agency agreements. They do need to be in writing, but it's because the commission says they do. with this phrase called reality of consent, it can also be voidable. Contract can be voidable if there's a mistake or some sort of a chance of fraud happening. Those two things can also make it voidable. You could think of it this way. Mistake or fraud was because of a person problem. So again, voidable is a problem with the people. Somebody made a mistake. Somebody tried to be fraudulent against another person. Also, duress and undue influence, more testable words. Remember the levels? We talked about the syllabus, level 1, 2, and 3. These are level 1. What is the definition of under duress? Anybody have an idea? You've seen this in the world. If someone's under duress, what makes that? So what is it what does it mean to be under duress? Is it a happy situation? Some sort of pressure or stress. And more specifically in this case, to be under duress, to sign a contract while under duress, is because someone is threatening you or literally being violent against you. Violence or the threat of violence. That's what we're talking about. And guess what? You sign it because they threatened you. This is now a voidable contract. You could choose to get out of it because that you signed it under duress, under violence or threat of violence. Could you still close on it? Yes, you could still close on it. Wow, I signed it because they scared me to death, but gosh, that's a pretty good deal. Let me just go ahead and do this thing. Right? So signing under duress, violence or threat of violence. Undue influence is also a negative thing, bad thing. However, it's not about violence. Signing something because of undue influence, think of this horribly sad situation. You're welcome. Elderly parent, the old homestead. The adult son says, hey, mom, in the nursing home, I really want you to sign this contract to sell your house you've had for 80 years because, I'd really hate for you to not be able to see your grandkids anymore. Let's just go ahead and get this thing sold. Let's cash out so we can pay for your care. And I really want you to do this. And grandma or mom doesn't want to, but he really leans hard on her because of an undue influence. He can influence her because of his position of power, of control. He's trying to psychologically manipulate. He's got undue influence. It's sort of that idea. So undue influence is pressuring somebody. Again, that makes it voidable as well. Maybe grandma gets a visit by Saul Goodman, who's visiting the nursing home, and he says, he did what? I'm going to sue him for you because he got you to sign this thing through undue influence. We're going to get you out of that contract, ma'am, because it's voidable, right? Voidable. These two words are making a contract voidable. Auctions. Yep, you got it, Marcus. I hate it's gone. Did you like the ending? So auction sales. Anybody still go to eBay? eBay's still a thing. Some people still do it. I've bought a few things, guitars and stuff. I've sold a few things long ago. Now there's plenty other options, but it's similar. When it comes to auctioning real estate, two things you need to know. Number one, let's talk about this one first. Just like eBay, you could gamble that, I'm going to sell this guitar and people are going to be so in love with it, they're going to fight each other over it. So I'm not even going to set a reserve price. I'm so confident that it's going to go high that I'm just going to say, hey, here it is. We're going to starting bid is $1. And let's just let them sit there and watch the feeding frenzy as they fight each other, counter offering back and forth or outbidding back and forth. That is an auction without a reserve, in which case maybe I'm wrong and they don't like my highly customized guitar and I'm counting on getting 1,000 or more and only the highest offer gets up to 400. If I chose to list it without a reserve, guess what? I'm only making 400 because I chose to gamble. I chose to not put a reserve price. If, however, I list it with a reserve price of at least $950, then when it doesn't quite hit $950, I am not obligated to sell it. Same thing, bigger prices, bigger numbers when it comes to real estate, probably. So your auction with the reserve, you're putting in a stopgap, right? You're putting in a minimum selling price so that you can get out of it if you don't like that it didn't come up as high as you wanted. So that applies in real estate too. But who is conducting auctions? It's called an auctioneer. If you're going to use auctioning to sell real estate, you need an auctioneer's license and you also need a broker's license. You got to have two things. You definitely need a broker's license so you're not wasting your time sitting here with me. But after this, getting your broker license, go get your auctioneer's license, and now you can use auctioning as a method to sell property for people. That auctioneer is hired by the seller, just like a listing agent, and they're hired by the seller for the purpose of using this auction in order to sell it. So you do need a real estate broker's license for it. That person who's talking real fast might not be the actual auctioneer person, the one who's saying blah, 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 sold, right? Hit the gavel. That's the crier, and they do not have to have a license. And that's about it for the testable stuff regarding auctions. The auctioneer must have a license as a broker and a license as an auctioneer. The crier doing the auction, conducting it, does not need a license at all. They're basically an employee. They're an employee of that auctioneer. And then the two types, with reserve versus no reserve. When we come back from break, I'll present this question to you, and I'll see you in 10 minutes. back and join me, won't you? Knockout this evening. Almost done. So a buyer makes an offer for $150,000. The seller counteroffers for $153,000. The buyer says not interested and decides to keep looking. The next morning, the seller finds out they need to transfer with their job a month sooner. They reach out to the buyer and say they will accept the original offer of $150,000. Does the buyer have to honor that original offer? Go ahead, I'll wait. Give me more. Got some answers, keep going. Buyer have to honor that original $150,000. In fact, they do not. It died when the $153,000 counteroffer was made. That buyer is not obligated anymore. They are free to go. They're free to go. That's the importance of a counteroffer and understanding its gravity. Making a counter, making any change, even if that seller had kept the $150,000 and only countered with a day difference in closing date or any change at all, that would have voided out that $150,000. That $150,000 is no longer on the table. The buyer's not obligated to honor it. Here's the statute of frauds again. It says something must be in writing in order to be enforceable. Contracts apply under the statute of frauds. They need to be in writing to be enforceable. We know that. Let me skip one. Option contracts. Having a contract that says you get to have time to decide about buying it later. That's the option to purchase contract. That needs to be in writing in order to be enforceable. And then the one in the middle is kind of strange. You notice it very specifically has a duration. It does not say leases that are 3 years or longer. It says leases that are longer than 3 years. So just write it down and say, leases longer than 3 years must be in writing to be enforceable. So here's the concept. If a lease is for 3 years or less, then the tenant has protections built in. For instance, if the owner of the property decides to sell it and the new owner says, I've got better things in mind, I want to get that tenant out of there. I'm going to evict the tenant because I'm the new owner. I don't want them there anymore. Their lease means nothing to me. If it's a lease of 3 years or less, they're not able to do that. They have to honor it. They have to honor that lease. That tenant is not going to have to worry about being kicked out if it's a lease of 3 years or less. But if it's a lease longer than 3 years, that tenant could possibly end up being kicked out by the new owner unless it's in writing. If it's only a verbal oral lease and it's a lease for longer than 3 years, the tenant could get kicked out by the new owner. So in order for that tenant to be protected when it's a longer than 3 year term, they need to have the lease in writing in order for it to be enforceable. I know it's a weird concept. You're probably thinking, I will never need to know this in my entire career, and you're probably right. But just know that little nuance. That's it. It's just a testable item. Just on the test question, when you realize it's having to do with this topic, look for that part about being longer than 3 years. If they say leases of 3 years or less must be in writing to be enforceable, it's real easy to see all those little buzzwords and think, yeah, I saw that. Yes, the answer is yes. But no, the answer is no. They don't need to be in writing to be enforceable. There's automatic protections if it's for 3 years or less. Good luck kicking a tenant out if it's for 3 years or less, in writing or not. But if it's longer than 3 years, then that lease has to be in writing in order to be enforceable, in order for that new owner to not be able to kick them out. So it's got to have those various provisions in place. Be in writing to be enforceable if it's longer than 3 years. Another testable item is this concept of electronic signing. We can do lots of real estate without killing any trees. No trees are at the mercy of our real estate transactions. In other words, none of it requires real paper. I've written a contract, I've written an offer with this phone. I can just write it up and set up DocuSign and send it and get signatures. It's no fun. It's a little bit too small of a screen, but it is possible and it is legal because of the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act. UETA. Look for that little acronym. Test question could say, because of the following provision or the following legislation, electronic signatures are allowable. Answer choice A, the Truth in Lending Act. Answer choice B, UETA. C, the Acceleration Clause, or D, the Protection Clause. Best choice, obviously, UETA. What does UETA mean? It means that electronic signatures are binding, legally binding, just as much as what are called wet signatures, meaning a wet signature means the ink is not dried yet. It's actual signatures of pen on paper. So when you see wet signature, that means a traditionally signed piece of paper with a pen. So electronic creates just as legal of a contract. What could terminate a contract? The official unfortunate word for that is discharge. What could discharge a contract? Well, our favorite way of termination is full performance. We're successfully closing. You're getting paid. Congratulations. Let's terminate this crap out of this contract. Let's get this thing done because I want to get paid. Full performance terminates contracts because you don't need it anymore. It's done. You could also have a contract terminated because the buyer and seller agree, let's not do this anymore. You know what? We can't come to agreement over the repairs. You want me to fix more than I'm willing to fix. You know what? And the buyer maybe in the meantime says, I'm kind of disenchanted at the whole process. I don't like the house as much as I used to. No harm, no foul. Just let me have my money back and I'll be on my way. And they could agree to all that. Parties could say, yeah, let's do this thing and not do this thing anymore, right? Let's don't do it. If the parties agree to stop it and terminate the contract, does that mean the seller is not obligated to pay the brokers? If the buyer and seller agree not to go through with the contract, does that mean the brokers don't get paid for sure? Absolutely, not getting paid. My favorite answer when it comes to that sort of thing is this. It might. It depends, right? It depends on what. What does it depend on? Where in the process we are. Did we produce a ready, willing, and able buyer? There it is. Thank you, Holly. Well, if that buyer made an offer, then clearly they were ready and willing. But did their loan go through? No, didn't go through before they decided to just not do this. Then you don't have an able buyer. You just had a ready and willing one, but not an able one. Therefore, good luck. May not have so much luck collecting your commission, suing for your commission. If they were paying cash, yeah, we have a ready, willing, and able buyer. You might have a shot. If you want to go through the court process, you might be able to get it. So the parties could agree to terminate this contract, but it might include having to still pay the brokers. It could be that it's impossible to perform, maybe some sort of an issue related to the property title keeps it from being able to sell. Maybe they realized a third person, like a cousin, a remote cousin, owns 10% of the property, and we can't find them. They cannot be located. They went to Vegas and they never came back. And there's no body count. There's no news of passing away. Who knows where they are? They're probably riding on the back of a motorcycle across the country. And so therefore they can't sign off to sell it. It's impossible to perform. So therefore the contract could be terminated because of impossibility of performance. It could also be something called operation of law. Any examples, any idea what an operation of law might mean for keeping a contract from closing and making it go away? Yeah, that's a good one. Foreclosure could certainly, if the foreclosure date is close enough, it's possible that the lender would choose to foreclose. So here's how that could work. The lender sends out the foreclosure notice because you didn't realize, maybe you're the listing agent, you didn't ask and you didn't realize the seller has been 5 months behind on paying their mortgage. You got under contract and now they receive a foreclosure notice. And when is the court date? When is it going to all start and all that fun stuff? Possibly. In real life, in my experience, as long as the lender who is trying to foreclose is told that we're under contract and we're supposed to close and it's all looking like it's going to work and it's going to close for enough money to pay off the loan, as well as the penalties that now are going to be incurred because it went to foreclosure. Because now you owe more than the 5 months you're behind. Because they had to foreclose and start the process, an attorney, the trustee, we'll learn about what that is in a minute, or not in a minute, but next week. The person implementing the foreclosure on behalf of the lender is an attorney and they have to get paid. So now you're going to have to make up all your back mortgage payments plus penalties and fees and things like that. As long as you can sell it for enough to cover all that stuff, the lender's probably going to pause the foreclosure and give you a chance to do this because all they want is their money. They do not want to foreclose. That's expensive and time consuming. Just give us our money and you are free to go. So as long as all that works out, probably not going to hold it up. Another example, though, of an operation of law could be a bankruptcy. The seller decides to declare bankruptcy, and therefore part of that is liquidating assets, and part of that is letting the property go into foreclosure. Guess what? Contract's dying if the seller decides to declare bankruptcy. Could also be that whole minor situation. A minor operation of law, the minor decides to back out of the contract, whether selling or buying, because it's a voidable contract. That would be another example of operation of law. Yeah, okay, seized by law enforcement. That's an exciting documentary to watch. I love those shows. Maybe some sort of a drug charge thing requiring law enforcement to seize the property. Sure. Some sort of an operation of law would supersede the fact that it is a contract, that it is under contract. Okay, another term to be aware of is this assignment idea. Has anybody seen the yellow signs on the street corners that say we'll buy houses for cash or fast closing and a phone number? It looks like it's somebody hand drew it. Those are called bandit signs, and they look so informal for a reason. They get better calls because it looks like a seller is desperate, and it might be. It looks like a buyer. Sorry, it's just sort of a. It looks like a buyer is just a regular guy instead of a professional investor that's looking for these opportunities as a career. And so those bandit signs, they're looking for desperate sellers, really motivated sellers. They want to find sellers willing to sell their houses for pennies on the dollar. I'm talking minimum 20% less, but probably more like 40 and 50% less than market value. They want to have something with a whole lot of room in it between what it's worth and what they can buy it for. And so it might be that investor finds a really desperate seller. The property's worth $400,000. The seller just needs to get a quick $200,000, and so they're willing to sell it for $200,000. And so they enter into a contract and they sign it together. And now that buyer before they even close on the property, has something of value. If they have a signed contract from that seller, that buyer has a very valuable thing in the form of that contract. With the permission, I should say, as long as that contract does not prohibit assigning it, then that buyer, investor, could call up his other investor friend and say, hey, I got a good one. You know what? I don't want to flip this one myself. I don't want to keep this one. Let me sell it to you. Let me sell you the rights to this contract for a quick amount of money. You give me 10 grand and I'll sell you and assign this contract over to you, and you could stand to make $180,000 if you go through with the whole thing, buy it, and then fix it up and then sell it or keep it as a rental. I don't care what you do with it. Just give me my assignment fee. So that first buyer who got the whole thing started with that seller says to their investor buddy, I'll assign this to you, and you have all the rights, privileges associated with this contract because I'm putting it into your name in exchange for you giving me some money. And this happened. This still happens. And it used to be an investment strategy that people would use, I guess sort of maliciously, or at least irresponsibly. Because if that first buyer assigns it to another buyer who's not actually able to go through with it, then what do we have here? A desperate seller who probably sold it at such a discount because they're trying to avoid foreclosure, or who knows, get somebody out of jail or whatever it could be. And they take up their time, spend their time waiting to get this thing closed, and they think it's going to work, only to find out it was assigned to someone else who cannot perform, who cannot end up qualifying to buy it, or who chooses to walk away. So assigning is just that, assigning your rights over to someone else. And here's the nuances to it. It's allowed unless it's not. If the contract specifically says no assignments allowed, then you can't do it. Our standard offer to purchase and contract form, 2T, it says as long as the seller knows about it, then you can choose to assign it. That's okay. The other part of this is the one who originally signed up for it, originally agreed to buy it, the one who's assigning it to the other buyer, the backup secondary buyer, that first person is secondarily liable for the performance of the one he assigned it to. So if that buyer number two that received it and got it assigned to them ends up not buying it, then the first person who assigned it to him is liable for if they can't come after the second guy for not performing. If he's not able to be found, if he's not able to remedy the situation, then the assignor remains secondarily liable. So you've got protections built in by law when you do assignments. You can't be predatory about it. This phrase we run into a couple of times in the contract that we use, and it's called time is of the essence. And what do you think it means? That's a dumb question. Yeah, time's pretty darn important here. So much so that we're making it a priority. Time is of the essence. Contracts are, for the most part, all about dates. When you put in something in a contract, it's like a day. March 5th, September 23rd. But when it's a time is of the essence date, it includes a time. And if you go past that specific time of day, there's something that's no longer in play. So the way we tend to see it and what we use is 5 p.m. 5 o'clock p.m. is the time on this date that you've entered into the blank. So time is of the essence dates means, for instance, the due diligence period. That's a great example. And really the primary thing where we see time is of the essence. Let's look at it over here. Here's our offer to purchase. There it is, 2T. If we go to the second page and look for that due diligence period, The period beginning on the effective date, that means the date at which this became a contract, which it means offered and accepted offer and communicated. That is the effective date. All the way through, fill in the blank date on 5 p.m. Time is of the essence. That means, what do we do during this due diligence period? That's the amount of time that the buyer has to decide if they want to keep going. And they're going to base that decision on inspections they might have had done, on the appraisal coming through, and maybe not appraising for full value. If it doesn't appraise for the full sale price, the buyer may not be able to get the loan. Because when a property that everybody has agreed to buy for $400,000 only appraises for $380, guess what? The lender's not going to loan you 90% of $400,000. They're only going to loan you 90% of $380,000. They're going to base their loan on the appraisal, not on the sale price agreed upon. It's got to be backed up by the appraiser who says, yep, it's worth it. And if they don't think it's worth it, if they think it's worth $380, that's what your loan's going to be based on. 80% of $380 or 90% of $380, whatever that may be. So you might decide not to buy it. You can't, because your loan won't go through. And as long as you decide not to buy it while you're still within this due diligence period, then you get your earnest money back. Because remember, you wrote 2 checks as a buyer when you made the offer and it got accepted. One check was for this thing called due diligence fee. And that's made directly to the seller, and you give it to the seller when it becomes a contract. It's non-refundable. Seller doesn't have to give it back. They can spend it immediately. And the other one is some kind of earnest money. It could be this one, or it could be this one, or it could be both. But essentially 2 things, due diligence money and earnest money. The only difference between these 2 kinds of earnest money is when they are due, when you turn them in. Don't forget, earnest money does not go to the seller. It is given to the escrow agent, some other third person that's going to hold on to it. Typically either one of the firms, buyer firm or seller firm, or the closing attorney. More and more frequently, it's the closing attorney, because a firm can choose not to have a trust account, and that's where you have to hold earnest money, is in a trust account. I don't have a trust account because I don't want to manage it and maintain it and reconcile it. It'd be one more checking account I have to balance and reconcile. And while I could earn interest based on whatever money is in it, it wouldn't be enough interest to be worth the extra thing to do every month. And more firms, bigger firms than me, are deciding this same thing. Nobody wants to hold earnest money anymore, unless you're just some huge firm. So someone's holding it. And so the difference when it comes to due diligence period, is the money. If the buyer backs out while they're still within this due diligence period, they are not getting their due diligence money back. They're not getting that back. They are subject to possibly getting the earnest money back if they back out during the due diligence period. So if this due diligence period expires on, let's see, tomorrow's March 23rd, 5 p.m., what if that buyer decides to back out and not buy the property because the seller won't fix the leaky roof and they don't want to buy something with a whole big problem like that? What if they decide to back out at 4:59 p.m. tomorrow? Are they subject to get their earnest money back when they choose not to move forward? Yeah, that's before 5. Sure. Are they going to get their due diligence money back? They are not. Absolutely not. Even if the seller won't fix the repair items, even if there's $30,000 worth of it wrong. It's like, wow, that's a lot wrong. That seller had to know. Well, seller won't fix any of it. Buyer chooses not to buy it because they don't have $30,000 to fix something that they just bought. So therefore, I'm out of here. Let me just keep looking. And my due diligence fee that I'm subject to lose is $20,000. So either I lose 20 by walking, or I lose 20 later because I got to spend, or I lose 30 later because I got to spend 30 to fix it once I go through with buying it. It's a hard decision, but they might have to make that. So if they walk away from the transaction, they're absolutely losing that due diligence money, but maybe that saves them something in the long run of having to buy something full of problems. And that's just the problems you know about. So anyway, that's what we mean by time is of the essence. What if they decide not to go through with the sale at 5 p.m. and 1 second? Are they getting their earnest money back? They're not. That's why it's time is of the essence, right? So we only see time is of the essence on the standard 2T contract in two places. This is the one that was most notable. The other one is this other earnest money item. And let me just this is more of a post thing, but I just want to point it out. The difference between initial earnest money and additional earnest money is not what you think. It does not mean that I'm giving some today and I'll give you some more later. That's what it sounds like. And yes, it could be that, but it's usually not that. The only real difference in why you would use one or the other depends on your buyer's choice of when they want to give it away. When do they want to turn it in to the escrow account, to whoever's holding the escrow, whoever's holding it in the trust account? When I say escrow, same thing as trust account. If they are willing to give that earnest money up within 5 days of the effective date, then we can label it initial earnest money and put it on this blank. If they're okay with giving the earnest money away, letting someone else hold it in their trust account within 5 days of when this becomes a contract, then this is what we would use. And they can give it in the form of cash, personal check, or bank check, or wire transfer. But what happens? What if they do that? What if they've made the offer, it gets accepted, they've given the due diligence fee upon effective date, so the seller now has that. They're never getting that back. And they go ahead and give up the earnest money and let that go into a trust account. Well, if the buyer then decides to back out, even within the due diligence period, they back out at 4:59 on this day, the seller could say, I'm mad at you. Buyer, how dare you ask me to fix all those things? I'm not fixing them. And now you're telling me you want to back out within the due diligence period, which is your legal right, by the way, but I'm still mad at you, and I'm not going to sign the release form to give you your earnest money back. The seller could absolutely do that. Even though it's spelled out very explicitly in here that if the buyer chooses to back out during due diligence, they're supposed to get it back. The seller could still hang them up. They could still hold them up and refuse to sign the release. And guess what? The person, the firm, or the attorney holding that money in trust account, they can't do anything with it until they have permission from everybody. Even if they like the buyer better than the seller, or even if the buyer is their client and the seller is not. And even if they realize, hey, seller, you're not doing the right thing. You agreed to these terms. You're supposed to give them that earnest money back. It is not for us as brokers or even attorneys holding the money in trust to decide to release it. We have to wait until the parties sign off in writing who's going to get it. Is the seller going to let the buyer get it back? Is the buyer going to agree to let the seller keep half of it or any sort of compromise? We have to sit and wait. So think about this. What if it's a buyer that doesn't have a lot of money available? They're trying to squeak by. They saved up. They're getting a low down payment loan like a VA or an FHA loan. And now $10,000 of earnest money is tied up because the seller won't release it. And this buyer doesn't want to buy this house. They want to just be free to go keep looking and buy something else, but they need their $10,000 back. And they, by rights, should get it back because they're backing out during this due diligence period, but the seller won't sign the release form. How could we keep that horrible situation from happening to begin with? We could use additional earnest money instead of initial earnest money. Don't ever even give it in this format. where you have to turn it in within 5 days. Because look, if you use additional earnest money instead, can call it that instead, then you can choose when to turn it in. And how about this? Set that date for the day of due diligence deadline, 3 or 4 weeks away, the point at which the buyer could still choose to walk away. And so now let's go to that other situation. The buyer says, hey, it's $4.59 on due diligence day. I don't want to buy it. I'm out. The seller says, well, I'm not signing the release of your earnest money. And the buyer says, well, I don't care because there is none. I didn't turn it in yet. I didn't have to because we set it for tomorrow. And so I haven't had to give any due diligence money, earnest money. So forget you, seller. I'm out of here and I got my monies too because I didn't have to turn it in yet. So that's a great strategy. It's a great strategy to protect your buyer as a buyer agent. Don't ever use initial earnest money if you can get away with it. Try to always use additional so that you can set a specific date when it's going to be due and make that date close to the due diligence deadline, right? But see, obviously, because we're setting a specific date, it needs to be time is of the essence. So that's what all that's about. It's been around for a long time, but a lot of agents still don't understand the difference. And it can be a very effective tool that gives your buyer protection, especially those buyers sensitive to money. They're working with a very limited amount and they can make or break their ability to keep trying on the next house. So take care of them. Use stuff like that. For the most part, though, one more look. For the most part, the dates in the contract, especially this very important settlement date, are not time is of the essence. This settlement date, we frequently miscall it the closing date. Settlement versus closing is two different occasions. It's hopefully on the same day, but two different things are happening. At the settlement meeting, the parties are signing off all the papers. They're signing everything, but that's not closed. It doesn't get closed. Here's the procedure, and we'll get more into that when we hit chapter 21 on closing procedure. But here's how it works. You set a closing date, and let's say it's Friday at 10 a.m. The seller goes there, the buyer goes there. The seller will probably be taken back first by themselves with them and their agent and the attorney. They'll sign a handful of documents, the deed, a couple other things, and they're out in 15 or 20 minutes, unless they have a bunch of questions, and they leave. They've signed those things, including something called a settlement statement that has all the dollars that are going back and forth. The money they're going to end up getting, the expenses they have to pay, the credits they're getting in their favor. The biggest of those credits is the purchase price, by the way, right? So they've signed and they're gone. Now the buyer gets taken back, and if they're getting a loan, they're going to be there longer, maybe 45 minutes to an hour, maybe more. So they're going to sign all those documents. It's probably 2 inches thick worth of papers from the lender. And once they sign them, guess what? They don't get the keys yet. And by the way, when the seller left a few minutes ago, they did not get their money yet either, because we're not finished. The attorney's got some more things to do. Now that everything is signed, the attorney is going to tell the lender, hey, we're done. We signed it. Here, let me scan all these documents back over to you so you can verify the signatures and initials and see that you're happy. We didn't miss any. And then you give us the go-ahead, fund the transaction, which they probably have already done. The lender probably already wired the $300,000 loan amount to the attorney's account. The attorney is going to say, yep, it's all done. Here they are. The lender says, looks good to us. You can go ahead and record the deed. And so that we're still not done. Now the paralegal or the attorney, either or, one or the other, is going to go to the courthouse, either physically or online, and sit in line. They're going to stand there in line. They're going to be in a queue and wait their turn. Even if they're online to record online, they have to wait their turn, because somebody live on the other end of that connection literally has to record this deed. Before they do that last recording of the deed, they're going to do one more title search. to make sure no additional mechanics liens got levied against the property. Remember those? Oh, I forgot I didn't pay the roofer. Oops. In the last 10 minutes, that roofer filed a mechanics lien. Between the time we signed our papers and the time we're trying to record the deed, a new lien popped up. We got to address this thing. We're not going to close this thing until we address this lien. That's the point of it. One last check for any additional liens that might have snuck in there. If none of that happens, and usually it doesn't, and it's all fine, then they'll record the deed. And they'll record the new deed of trust with the new buyer. Once they've recorded the deed, they're going to call the agents or email the agents and say something like, we're on record, or we have recorded, come pick up your check. And that's the point at which the seller gets their money, the buyer can get the keys and have access to the house, and you brokers can get your money. This point in time is probably at least a couple of hours from the last time someone signed a document at the settlement meeting. So the difference is that was the settlement, and this moment, deed recordation is the closing, right? So when are we closing? On this date, notice it's not a time is of the essence thing, because if there's that mechanics lien problem, or maybe even before that, the lender can't quite get all the documents finished, and the broker might call the attorney and say, hey, do we have a loan package yet? Has the lender sent over the package, meaning emailed you all of those millions of PDFs that need to be printed off and signed? Loan package in the form of the deed of trust and the promissory note. We'll talk more about those things. Do you have all that? The attorney might say, no, haven't seen a thing. And now your tummy hurts. You're the broker. And you're like, oh, crap. Are we closing today? Are we even going to have a settlement meeting today? And so it was originally intended to be 10 a.m. and now it's 12 and still no loan package. And you're bothering the lender. They're like, we're trying our best. It's in underwriting. We had one final change to make and now it's got to go through the process and you got to wait in line because there's 3 ahead of you. You're like, oh my gosh, please happen. And if it doesn't happen before 4 o'clock, it's not going to record that same day because that's when the Register of Deeds office closes. Even if you're doing it online, you're done at 4. So if you don't get that thing deed recorded by 4 and it's Friday, we had a settlement meeting. Everybody signed papers, but we're not going to have a closing because closing happens when it's recorded and it's not going to record till maybe Monday if you're lucky. So now settlement day is different than closing day. And so now we got to figure out, are we going to let the buyer move in over the weekend? What needs some insurance coverage? Seller okay with that? Buyer, everybody's nervous. Nobody's happy, but we're really close. So the point to all that is this: quite often settlement dates can get pushed. That would be probably even better because in that situation I just mentioned, because at least we know closing's probably going to be Monday. But it could be that the lender says, you know what, guys, we can't even send you a loan package when we thought we could. We thought it was going to be today. It's not going to be till next Friday because we've got to do this and that and the other. So it needs to have some flexibility in it. It cannot be time is of the essence because it's quite frequently that things get delayed, especially closing dates. So that's why it's not time is of the essence. That's kind of how all that works. All right. The word novation means we're substituting a new contract for an old one. We need to make things neat, or we need to change some terms, but still not breach the contract. And a novation is basically just novation, think new contract. We're terminating the old one. It's still the same parties. We might be adding new parties. Could be either one. It's supported by consideration. It still has to conform to essential elements of a contract. And so it's really just neatening things up or making some changes that everybody still agrees to. But that's about it. Just know it as a term, just a definition. When it comes to this term, interpretation, what we mean is, what did you talk about in the initial negotiations? Was there back and forth? Hey, would you leave the pool furniture? Would you leave that desk? How about the U-shaped couch? Yeah, no, maybe. If any of those sorts of back and forth discussions don't make it into the contract, then they're not enforceable. You can go to court over it and say, well, they were supposed to leave the desk and they didn't. Judge Judy's going to say, did they put it in the contract? Well, no, but they promised. Get out of my courtroom, right? Preliminary negotiations are not admissible if they're not written into the contract. How does that happen in real life? It might be that in the multiple listing service, the seller says the refrigerator to remain with the property with acceptable offer. We'll leave behind the refrigerator, maybe even the washer and dryer. But maybe later in the phase, in the process, the buyer asks for repairs and the seller's mad about it and their feelings are hurt. And so when they're packing up their stuff to leave, they include and load up the refrigerator and the washer and the dryer, and they don't leave it in the house. And so you as the buyer agent go for the walkthrough and those appliances are missing. And your buyer says, wait, they were supposed to leave these things. And you say, let me call the listing agent. And you call them and the listing agent says, yeah, well, we said so in the MLS, but if you'll notice in the contract, we never wrote it into the contract. You forgot. And that's what everybody signed. There's no mention of refrigerator, washer, or dryer in the contract. And you very nervously and with bad feelings in your belly look up the contract and realize, oh my gosh, I forgot. It's in the MLS. The seller promised to leave it, but it never made it into the contract. Does that seller get to keep those appliances? Does that buyer get those appliances left behind in the house? Are you going to pay for 3 new appliances out of your commission check to keep your buyer happy because you made the mistake? I call it happiness money. Don't lowball up front your commission just to get the deal because you might have to pay off somebody to keep them happy. It happens. You might have to buy somebody a warranty. You might have to buy somebody an appliance to fix a mistake you made, and they still might turn you into the commission and have to suffer maybe some disciplinary action. So just be aware. If it doesn't make the contract, it's not an obligation. They don't have to include it. So make sure the things that are important to your client get put into the contract because that written contract rules. The interpretation, we're interpreting the contract. What does it mean? Well, it needs to be a reasonable expectation of what they meant by how they worded that contract. And I'm talking about like when people add words into the contract, make modifications. Is it a reasonably understood kind of a modification? And does it satisfy, does it make sense to the contract as a whole? These are all the questions a judge is going to ask when they're trying to determine, is this an enforceable contract? They're going to take words in their ordinary meaning. No acrobatics. You know how attorneys can be. They can flip words around. They can say things like, it depends on the definition of the word is, right? They can get real nuanced. So words are interpreted in their ordinary meaning. And if it's an ambiguous provision, meaning can't quite tell which way they mean for it to be, did they mean this or did they mean that? Wait, who wrote this thing? The person who wrote the ambiguous language loses. They're going to be the one ruled against. It's going to rule in the favor of the other party against the one who wrote that language that was hard to decipher, right? The parole evidence rule basically sums all that up and says what we verbally agreed to doesn't matter. It must be in the contract. Now it's enforceable. That's what matters. So make sure to get that desk into the contract or that refrigerator or that other provision that your client cared about. We talk about the term breach. That means someone let down their promises. They did not fulfill their promises. They are breaching what they promised to do. And when a person has a breach against them, they can go to court and there's some various damages available. So the seller has a buyer that tries to breach, let's say, and that anytime parties sue each other, you've got compensatory damages, which are any sort of monies that are used to bring the party back to a whole, that they lost something. So let's reinstate the thing they lost. Let's make them whole again. And so therefore, let's award them compensatory damages to make up for what they lost through this situation. It could also be something called consequential damages. Because you did this bad thing to them, they lost out on profits. So let's also award them another $10,000 for the lost profits they suffered. So we're giving them $5,000 for getting them whole again, another $10,000 for the lost profits they suffered. Another consequence of legal action could be that we just let everybody go back to their original positions. We're not giving anybody extra money. We're just giving them whatever they're out of pocket from, putting them back to where they started. Let's make them whole again, return them to their original positions, and just move forward from there. We're going to not do this anymore, and the buyer gets what they have in it, and the seller gets what they have in it, and we're back to our starting point, and we're going to pretend this never happened. When it comes to the real estate contract and the buyer does something to back out, it's the second one on this page that the seller has available to them. So another way to word that is, what are the remedies available to a seller? What are the remedies to the seller if a buyer breaches? Those remedies are called liquidated damages. Liquidated damages, that's all the seller is going to get if the buyer backs out of the contract. And what does that include? So a good testable question is, what are liquidated damages in the standard real estate contract? That's what we call earnest money and due diligence money. The seller better be happy with how much those amounts are, because that's all they're getting. They agree to that in the contract. If the buyer backs out of this contract somewhere along the way, then I'm going to be satisfied with only having these two things. I'm not going to sue them. I can't sue them. I'm just going to take this amount because this is the liquidated damages the seller gets if the buyer doesn't go through with the whole contract. Don't forget, the buyer can back out at any time for any reason. The only thing they're subject to is how much they're walking away from. They're either walking away from the due diligence money alone or both the due diligence and the earnest money together, right? Depending on, did they back out within the due diligence period, in which case they're out the due diligence money, but they should get the earnest money back. Or they're backing out after the due diligence period, in which case they're losing all of it. But the seller better be happy with those amounts because that's all they're going to have access to. Those are the liquidated damages available to the seller in the event a buyer doesn't go through with it. So, the last couple of years, a lot of contracts, a lot of offers were very, what I call front-loaded. They put all the money in the form of due diligence and very little in the form of earnest money because the due diligence is tempting. It's non-refundable. So that seller would rather get $10,000 non-refundable than $5,000 for due diligence money, than get $5,000 for due diligence that they definitely get to keep and another $5,000 for earnest money that they might have to give back. Does that make sense? But here's the problem with that strategy. Yes, you get the non-refundable due diligence in the beginning, but let's say this thing drags out a couple of months, and now it's the day before closing, and now the seller has hired movers, put all their stuff on the truck, committed to buying a house. They're invested in this thing closing, and then the buyer chooses not to buy. That seller is going to wish they had some significant earnest money available to them, still yet to arrive and come into their possession. If all they got was what they got back at the due diligence, because they got 10,000 due diligence and now they only have 500 coming to them in the form of earnest money because the buyer's backing out so late in the game, that's not cool. So you want to explain that to your seller. Hey, seller, let's give some appreciation to the later money. Just in case, let's hold the buyer's feet to the fire, make them more inclined to go through with the sale at the last minute. Because at that point, the buyer might say, well, gosh, I already lost the 10,000 due diligence. I only stand to lose another 500 in earnest if I walk. So let's go ahead and walk. What's the big deal? I don't really want to buy this anymore. For whatever reason, they're kind of disenchanted with it now. They're much more inclined to walk away from that lower amount. So let's give credit to the full scope of both of these chunks of money in the form of their liquidated damages classification. We covered a lot of complicated concepts here, and we will pick it up next week. Don't leave yet. Don't forget, we do not have class tomorrow. We do not have class tomorrow. I'll be traveling tomorrow, so that was something in the original schedule. No class tomorrow. I'll see you next Wednesday, and we'll pick this chapter up then. So keep reading, keep going, moving your way through. When we get past the finance chapter, which is coming up after 9 and 10, I think it's, for this book, it's 14 and 15, which is what we'll cover in the next couple of weeks. That'll be the point that you should probably go ahead and do your midterm exam. But you don't probably have quite enough content under your belt to take it now and be effective. Go ahead and put your name in the chat for me. Have a great weekend. We're just marching on forward. So this is what chapter 9 will be 10, 11. Let me see. Let me double check. So in the syllabus, we're currently in section 9. And we're in order, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Those are the next, that's the next order, according to the syllabus, 13, 14. According to the book, it coincides. Okay, good, yeah. So same chapter numbers in the book as the syllabus, all the way up until we get to, all the way up until we get to 17, 18, 19. So we're in order all the way through. So just keep on going. Let's see, we're pretty much finished with 9. We have just a few more minutes. Then we'll get into chapter 10, which is going to be more of a full day's work, full evening, an entire 4 hours, maybe even some more. So 9 and 10 will probably get us through, and we might even touch on finance next week. 9, 10, 11 will be enough for next week. Keep at it, guys. I believe in you, and I hope you have the best weekend ever. Get some studying done. Take care.